Chapter 1133. Following the fall of Tilgsburg, the nobles who started the rebellion were wiped out in less than half a month. Those who were involved or were implicated were all slaughtered by this mysterious army that had stepped onto the stage for the first time. When Taser returned to the capital with the captives and a string of heads, the citizens of the city instantly exploded with unprecedented enthusiasm. This was especially so when they heard that the rebels had blocked the river. Many people were worried that it would lead to widespread famine. The price of food rose 3 times a day and was about to exceed the range that the people at the bottom could afford. But now, the Queen's army had actually used only a few days to wipe out the rebels who occupied the fortified military fortress. Even the 2 main culprits had become captives. The dark clouds that shrouded their hearts suddenly disappeared without a trace. Those profiteers and nobles who tried to take the opportunity to raise the price of food in order to make a fortune from the country's calamity had also paid a huge sum of money without exception. More importantly, this time the Queen had shown her strongest side. She swore that she would never pardon even a single rebel. She wanted to use their blood and heads to announce that even nobles would be mercilessly punished like commoners if they violated the kingdom's laws. Killing nobles. What an unbelievable scene. Since the establishment of the kingdom until now, the number of nobles who had been beheaded for violating the law could be counted on one hand. Most of them eventually paid the ransom and turned the matter into a small one. Therefore, for a moment, the decapitation square was densely packed with people who had come to watch the show. Among them were the people at the bottom who were excited and expectant. There were also nobles whose faces were ashen and whose eyes were burning with the flames of anger. At this moment, the intense conflict between the exploiting class and the exploited class had been completely stirred up by people with ulterior motives. The nobles felt that these lowly commoners actually dared to humiliate them in such a way and should all be executed. On the other hand, the commoners felt that the nobles had enjoyed their privileges for too long. It was time to give up some of their rights and land so that the talented people at the bottom could also have a chance to change their fate. Sensing the surging public opinion below, Villia, who was sitting on the high platform, pursed his lips slightly. A faint smile appeared on his face as he said, without turning his head, "Do you see that? This is the power that the nobles have always neglected, the power that comes from the lowly ants." Even though each of them was weak and could even be described as cowardly, as long as one hand gathered them together, they could form a torrent that could destroy the nobles. A new era has begun, but it's a pity that those who have one foot in the grave are still clueless. Your Majesty, the nobles can't be completely replaced yet. You'd better stay calm. Don't let victory get to your head, Isolt reminded in a low voice. Don't worry, I'm not that stupid. Radicalism is an undesirable behavior. It would do too much damage to the original system. I have read about it in books. I need to maintain the stability of the kingdom and complete the centralization and reform as smoothly as possible. We have to suppress the nobles bit by bit to prevent them from doing crazy things when they are forced into a corner. When he said this, Villia did not avoid mentioning his trusted subordinates whom he had personally promoted from the bottom, including Taser. Your Majesty, I am willing to be the sword in your hand and become the most ferocious hunting dog to eradicate all the enemies on your path forward. The old general bowed deeply. Hearing the Queen that he was loyal to say such sensitive words as centralization and reform in person, he felt that his old heart suddenly began to beat strongly again, as if he had returned to the prime of his life. His head was filled with the dream of making contributions and becoming a hero that was admired by thousands of people. Very good. I look forward to your performance. Now it's time for the executioner to begin the execution. Otherwise, my people will be impatient. Villia took off a lace glove and waved it at the half-naked, muscular man who had a black cloth covering his head. The latter understood what he meant and bowed. Without another word, he raised the sharp axe in his hand and chopped off the head of the culprit with a few cracking sounds. Scarlet blood spurted out a few meters away, causing the onlookers to scream. Some of the more timid women even fainted from shock. Damn it, this vicious woman. How dare she treat us like this? A middle-aged man, covered in a gray cloak, could not help but curse in a low voice. It was obvious that he was a noble, and his rank was not low either. Another person next to him laughed bitterly and mocked himself. Haven't you noticed? The reason why nobles are above the law is not because of how noble our blood is, but because we control a large amount of land and population. With land, we can produce food, and with a large population, we can have enough soldiers. In the past, the royal family controlled a quarter of the entire kingdom's army. The other 2 quarters were controlled by us, and the last quarter belonged to the merchants and free people. To a certain extent, the nobles who control half of the land and population are the true masters of this country. Even the royal family has to work with us to rule the country. But now, the new queen does not rely on the traditional army. She has enough power to maintain her rule and suppress rebellions. Naturally, we will lose our previous position. He's right. Unless you can find a way to defeat Villia's army, we won't be able to resist at all. A short man hiding in the corner and leaning against the wall agreed. So, our decline is inevitable? The middle-aged man who spoke first raised his head, revealing a face that was twisted with anger. What else can we do? You've seen the consequences of starting a rebellion. This time, we won't have the chance to pay the ransom to be pardoned. Times have changed, my friend. You can either go with the flow and make changes, or be swallowed by this torrent and disappear in the long river of history. Being flexible is the best way for a family to survive. Moreover, we have a huge advantage now, and that is the knowledge and the method to cultivate talents. Don't be stubborn anymore. The sooner you change, the more benefits you'll get. That's all I have to say. It's up to you whether you want to listen or not. Anyway, I won't participate in these meaningless gatherings anymore. After saying this, the short man turned and disappeared into the dark alley, not giving the other party a chance to ask him to stay. Similarly, in the next minute or so, a few people left one after another, unwilling to continue playing with the lives of their families. It had to be said that bloody and cruel killing was always the simplest, most direct, most violent, and most effective way to end resistance. All the so-called courage, integrity, righteousness, ambition, and desire were not worth mentioning in front of it. As long as the butcher's knife continued to fall, humans would follow their biological instincts and choose to live on until the day the ruler's knife could no longer be swung, and fierce resistance would be revived once again. Chapter 1134. It's a wonderful prologue, isn't it? Listening to the cheers and shouts of the surrounding crowd, Zhang Cheng revealed a rare, relaxed, and joyful smile on his face. He even felt a sense of satisfaction, as though he had personally promoted the progress of civilization and the era. Of course, these feelings originated from a part of him that had yet to completely shed his mortal nature. It was a false deception produced by his memories. Moreover, the fate of the natives of this planet had long been arranged. No matter what changes happened, they would eventually become the citizens of chaos. They would not even be able to step into the interstellar era like the civilizations of other planets. Instead, they would constantly evolve through killing each other until they reached a certain critical point one day. However, this kind of behavior with a little entertainment nature still brought some joy to Zhang Cheng. He even walked into an inconspicuous tavern, ordered some drinks and food, and sat in a corner to listen to people excitedly talk about the public execution just now. Just as he was tasting the slightly bitter ale and the ordinary barbecued meat, he suddenly discovered that there were 2 mysterious people hiding in a corner not too far away. They were arguing with each other in a low voice. Out of curiosity, he used a little of his power. Immediately, he heard one of the men quickly persuade, "My friend, what are you still thinking about? Join us. As long as you worship the great god of darkness and awaken him from his slumber, not only can you obtain money, power, and fame, but you can also go to the kingdom of God and enjoy a good life after death." But that's the god of darkness. Just hearing the name makes my hair stand on end. The other man was obviously struggling, his face full of hesitation. "Idiot! Lava is the only true god in this world. Look at the false gods worshipped in the temples, and those greedy priests and clerics. Which one of them would be like our church, giving the believers such great support and protection? Especially that lady. She has never embezzled a single bit of the church's property. Instead, she donated all her savings just so that those poor believers could have a hot meal. Compared to those people from other churches who love vanity and are keen on enjoying life, she is completely a saint, a great person who is willing to sacrifice for her faith. The man from before waved his arms, his tone full of fanatical longing and worship. He would probably never know that the saint he spoke of had once thrown a terrible magical plague into a densely populated city just to complete a mission, creating a terrifying massacre. Okay, I agree to join, but you have to take me to a secret meeting first. I need to see with my own eyes and hear with my own ears. The latter clenched his fist and made a condition. No problem. We have a ceremony in the woods outside the city at midnight. You can come. Remember, you must come alone, and you must arrive before midnight. You can't bring any lighting tools, the man warned in a serious tone. Understood. Then let's meet at midnight today. May the great God of darkness bless you. Be there or be square. After a short conversation, the two of them left the tavern one after the other, quickly making their way into a dark alley. After watching them leave, Zhang Cheng smiled and muttered to himself, "The god of darkness?" It seemed that the woman was quite capable. She actually managed to infiltrate the kingdom so quickly and silently. Hero of darkness, believer of darkness, let me see if you can make the fragrant flower of darkness bloom. Just as he finished speaking, he threw down a few gold coins created using alchemy and left the tavern without looking back. He walked toward the secret meeting outside the city. As a ruler, he could directly cross time and space and arrive at the moment of the event. However, in order to make things more interesting, he still chose to use the most traditional method to arrive at his destination, patiently waiting for time to pass by. When the midnight bell rang in the capital, the masked fellows walked out of their hiding spots and walked toward a large black rock. There was no sound, and no one did anything meaningless. They were like ghosts standing in a daze on the spot without moving. After a full 15 minutes, the leader stood up and recited loudly, "Praise you, the great god of darkness, Leiwa. You are the protector of the night, the only true God in this world. Please listen to our prayers and comfort our hearts. Praise you, Leiwa, the god of darkness. May you awaken from your deep slumber soon." The crowd repeated the words that they had recited in advance over and over again. The originally strange atmosphere gradually became feverish. After all, religion, whether supported by God or not, was a form of brainwashing to a certain extent. It made people gradually lose their sense of self, rationality, and independent thinking. In the end, they would entrust everything to a god and let the god complete it for them. This was especially true for group effects. It was most obvious in religious activities. Some fellows were even completely different when they participated in the activities and when they didn't. There was no need to ask to know that these believers of darkness had completed their hypnosis. If someone were to jump out and ask them to commit suicide to prove their faith in the god, there would probably be people who would do it without hesitation. The leader was clearly satisfied with the current atmosphere. He raised his hands and said loudly, "My dear brothers and sisters, thank you for once again listening to the call of the god of darkness, Leiwa, and offering up your pure faith at this special time. Perhaps some of you have already heard of the legend of the god of darkness, but there are also some new partners who don't know much about it. Today, let me tell those who don't know about the ancient history of the birth of the god of darkness. Lord Pastor, before you start telling the story, I would like to invite you to hold an acceptance ceremony for a new brother." The man who was preaching in the tavern stood up and took the initiative to remove the mask on his face. In fact, these people all knew each other. Rather than saying that they wore masks to hide their identities, it was more accurate to say that it was to increase the sense of mystery and ceremony. Apart from that, there was another use. If they were discovered, they could scatter and escape, preventing them from being caught by the patrols near the capital. "Oh, who is it?" The man who was called Pastor swept his gaze around. "It's me. Another man took the initiative to step forward and took off his mask as well. The two of them looked at each other for about 10 seconds before the pastor finally asked, "Tell me, young man, why do you believe in the God of darkness? And why did you join us?" Chapter 11:35. I don't know. The young man hesitated for a few seconds, but he soon shook his head, not knowing what to do. To be exact, he didn't even know what kind of god the God of darkness, Lua, was or what his teachings were. He simply wanted to find an organization that he could rely on to ensure that he wouldn't be bullied. One had to know that the King's City was not a place where just anyone could survive, especially lowly residents like him. Almost every day, they would hear about a young and beautiful girl suddenly disappearing from their neighbor's house. Then, a few weeks or months later, a naked, rotting corpse would be found in the moat or by the sea. Apart from that, there were also numerous criminal gangs that abducted people and forced children to engage in pickpocketing. If one didn't join a strong enough organization, then there was no way to survive by relying on one's own strength. The law had always been a tool used by the ruling class to maintain their own interests. Therefore, as long as it didn't directly threaten the interests of the ruling class, they wouldn't seriously enforce the laws that had been set. They also wouldn't waste a lot of time, money, and energy to care about how many people went missing every day and how many people were threatened and oppressed by local hooligans. Only when something triggered large-scale chaos and riots would these fellows begin to take it seriously. They would use political intervention to quell the anger of the people in the name of justice and upholding the dignity of the law. Anyone who had a little contact with those greedy bureaucrats would deeply understand a cruel truth. Most of the nobles couldn't be trusted. They didn't care about the lives of the commoners. The priest in charge of preaching was clearly aware of the current situation of the city's lower-class residents. He raised his arm and patted the young man's shoulder, comforting him. "You don't have to say anything. I understand. Don't worry. We're different from those churches that serve false gods. We won't force any of our brothers and sisters to do something they don't want to do. We also won't classify people based on how much they donate. Lua is a true god. He doesn't care about worldly rights and wealth. He only cares about whether your faith is devout. Come on, young man. Tell me what kind of help you need." You are willing to help me? Help a stranger you don't even know for free?" The young man's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. "Stranger? No. From the moment you are willing to offer your faith, we are no longer strangers. We are the people of the great God of darkness." The priest was like a patient elder. With just a few words, he opened the young man's psychological defense. There was no empty talk. He also didn't use too many provocative words. However, he gave people the urge to confide in him and become close friends with him. There was no doubt that this was the perfect missionary, a priest who could spread his faith to the gods and win the respect of mortals. Standing in the forest, Zhang Cheng silently observed the small secret gathering, especially the faint divine power of the priests. He pursed his lips and revealed a playful smile. Interesting. Even if he hadn't awakened yet, he was already unconsciously bestowing divine spells. "I hope this god of darkness won't disappoint me too much. He will play an important role in my future plans." Just as he finished speaking, the sound of horse hooves suddenly broke the silence of the midnight. "Damn it, it's the night patrols of the capital." A masked woman stood up abruptly and stared nervously at the fire snake that was getting brighter and brighter. Although there were only about 20 lights, no one dared to let their guard down. One must know that to these ordinary people who were barehanded and did not carry any weapons, the light cavalry was like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. They could not escape even if they wanted to. They could only watch as the sharp sabers flashed past them, and they died in a pool of blood. "Shh, don't make a sound. There's no light here. They shouldn't be able to discover us." The priest calmly raised his hand, indicating for everyone to remain calm and quiet. Unfortunately, wishes were always beautiful, but reality was always cruel. After a short while, the cavalry crossed a distance of several hundred meters and headed straight for the small forest. It was obvious that they had received some information beforehand and were here to capture or destroy this small church hidden in the capital. Just as the priest was about to use his trump card and use magic that couldn't be seen with the naked eye to completely seal off the area, a dazzling bolt of lightning suddenly fell from the sky and struck the unlucky fellow at the front. Unsurprisingly, he was electrocuted and turned into charcoal on the spot. This wasn't the end. The lightning snake flickered with dazzling white light as if it had a life of its own. It constantly jumped between the bodies of the rangers, killing both the man and the horse. In just a few seconds, more than half of the 20 rangers had fallen. The people at the back hurriedly turned their horses around to avoid the constantly jumping white lightning. They shouted at the top of their lungs, "Not good. There's a caster. There's a powerful caster among them. Retreat. Quickly retreat. Tell the captain the news." Unfortunately, in the time it took him to shout, another 4 or 5 of his companions died on the spot. As for the rest, they turned around and ran without saying a word. They ran even faster than when they came, not caring whether such a high-speed run would cause their horses to die of exhaustion. Watching the rangers who came and left suddenly, the priest's eyes flickered with the same light. After a while, he turned around and said to the dark forest, "Unknown sire, thank you for lending a hand at the critical moment and saving me and the people of the God of Darkness. If you don't mind, can you come out and let us express our gratitude?" "No, there's no need for that. I like to maintain a sense of mystery. Continue with what you should be doing. I have other things to do, so I won't disturb you any further. Finally, I wish you all the best in awakening the God of Darkness, Lua." After saying this meaningful sentence, Zhang Cheng immediately cast a teleportation spell and disappeared from where he was. Feeling the cool night breeze gently caressing his face, the priest quickly realized that the stranger who had helped him had left. He let out a bitter smile and sighed. In a voice that only he could hear, he muttered to himself, "Great God of Darkness, is this your reward for my piety? Or is this merely fate's arrangement? No matter what happens, I will walk on the path of faith unswervingly until you descend upon this world." Lord Priest, that was... A believer finally recovered from a shock and couldn't help but ask. "Don't ask. I don't know. Perhaps it was a friend of the church, or perhaps it was God's arrangement. In any case, we escaped from danger safely. And from the reaction of the cavalry, someone must have discovered this gathering place. Next time, we should change the location." Chapter 1136. Master, you're back. As soon as Zhang Cheng returned to the Mage Tower, Islands appeared immediately and bowed deeply. As time went by, chaos had completely changed him from his soul to his body. Whether it was his skin that shone with a dim light or his 2 strange vortex-shaped pupils, they all proved that he was no longer a native of this planet. Instead, he was an extremely cold, cruel, bloodthirsty, and tyrannical madman. The humility and obedience at the moment were completely due to the evil dog's usual behavior in front of its master. After leaving, he would revert to his old ways and continue those inhumane experiments. Of course, the above was not the most ironic thing. The most ironic thing was that when he was carrying out those crazy experiments, he had no idea that he was already a pitiful experimental subject. He was no different from those fellows lying in glass containers and wailing in pain. "Didn't I ask you to keep an eye on that woman? How was it? Did you find anything interesting?" Zhang Cheng glanced at him casually, a hint of curiosity flashing across his face. It should be known that the changes that happened to this young man were his attempts to modify the life of the entire planet. Whether it was a success or a failure, he could draw enough inspiration from it. After all, chaos symbolized disorder. It symbolized the possibility of a sudden change at any time. Therefore, a lot of experiments were needed to gain experience and control the changes of disorder within a certain range. In particular, the tree of chaos that was growing healthily had already begun to permanently modify the environment, affecting the huge ecosystem from its roots. Some plants and animals were mutating silently. It would not be long before some unprecedented new life forms were born. And these new life forms would spread like a virus, causing irreversible effects. Islands obviously did not realize that he was no longer the same person as before. Instead, he had unknowingly become another person. He hurriedly reported, "That woman formed a church with her own hands." By inciting the dissatisfaction and hatred of the people at the bottom against the rulers, she quickly established secret strongholds in many cities. According to my estimation, in just a few months, she has at least hundreds of thousands of believers. Some of them are even armed, enough to start a large-scale riot. What about the plan? Did she make any big moves? Zhang Cheng returned to his seat and sat down. He rested his chin on one hand and asked. For a religion that had just been established, hundreds of thousands of followers was already a considerable amount of wealth. If used properly, it would be more than enough to contribute to a small duchy and establish a country similar to the Soviet Union. Island shook his head and replied, "No." She strangely chose to endure. Even though several secret meeting points were destroyed, she did not retaliate. "Master, I think this is very strange. It doesn't match her personality and style of doing things in the past." "Oh." She actually chose to endure. I have to say, this really surprised me. At the same time, it also meant that she was starting to look at things from a higher level. But patience is not what I want. Go and do something for me. Let her church clash with the forces of the secular world. Also, create some conflicts and make a relationship with Kerwin hostile. Zhang Cheng gave several orders in one breath. "You mean, let her become Kerwin's enemy?" Alans asked uncertainly. He did not understand what his master was planning. What was the deeper meaning behind those seemingly disorderly and willful arrangements? Enemy? No, no, no. As a dark hero, I need her to become the enemy of all the countries on this continent. Amir Kerwin is only the first stumbling block on her path. Zhang Cheng straightforwardly said that he was prepared to abandon his first representative. Kerwin's vision was too small. In addition, he had too many petty thoughts. There was no need to keep him. When dealing with people who did not know their place, he had always squeezed out every last bit of value from them. Then, he would treat them as a test for the future. Religion and faith could never be forged in a peaceful environment. To be precise, all faith had to be baptized with blood, slaughter, and death. Only then could it be tempered into the purest and most selfless fanatical worship without any distracting thoughts. And this faith would become the nourishment for the awakening of the God of Darkness. It would also reshape his consciousness and soul from the inside out. Understood. I will immediately make the arrangements. Alans did not say another word. After bowing, he excitedly cast a teleportation spell and disappeared on the spot. About a few hours later, almost all the local rulers in the areas where the God of Darkness's church was secretly active received an anonymous letter. The letter used alarmist words to describe an evil cult that was hiding in the dark and plotting against them. It also said that they had seriously threatened the stability of society. If they were not eliminated as soon as possible, it would inevitably lead to disastrous consequences. In the next 3 to 5 days, a large number of secret gatherings were wiped out. The priests that had been painstakingly nurtured were also slaughtered one after another. In an instant, the originally favorable situation seemed to have fallen from heaven to hell. Looking at the letters piled up on the table, the woman sat on the chair with a gloomy expression. Her entire body emitted a terrifying aura. Needless to say, she was obviously enraged. The madness that had been suppressed by reason in the depths of her heart started to gain the upper hand. About 2 to 3 minutes later, she suddenly stood up and went straight to the stables in the backyard. She rode on a sturdy stallion and, without saying a word, madly galloped in the direction of the city hall. Along the way, no matter who dared to block her path, she would unsheathe her holy sword without hesitation and directly cut them in half. Clearly, this kind of unbridled destruction and slaughter quickly attracted a large number of guards. Some of them even held spears that were specially used to deal with horses. But before they could make a move, the terrifying power of the holy sword sucked away all their vitality, turning them into shriveled corpses. They were like mummies that had been stored for 1,000 years. Damn it! Stop her! Hurry up and stop her! At all costs! The officer in charge of guarding the city hall shouted at the top of his lungs as he took the lead and blocked the only way for them to pass. He knew that once the other party broke through the defense and entered the city hall, he would most likely lose his head. After all, nobles did not care how powerful the enemy they faced was. They only knew that their lives were threatened and would definitely pull out the person responsible to make an example out of them. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1137. Kneel. The woman did not choose to kill the officer. Instead, she reined in her horse in a way that defied the laws of physics and looked down at the officer. Her eyes were so terrifying that the officer trembled and knelt down after looking at her for a second. He felt as if he could not control his body at all. Bring me to the ruler of this city. The woman obviously didn't intend to waste any time. She ordered straightforwardly, even though the officer was struggling in his heart, trying to reject such an unreasonable request. But for some reason, he nodded subconsciously and humbly replied, "Please come with me. The knight is handling administrative matters in the room inside." With that, the two who were supposed to be enemies stepped on the dried corpses and walked through the main door, disappearing at the end of the quiet corridor. Such a strange scene, not to mention the onlookers on both sides of the road. Even the guards who were lucky enough to survive could not help but show a terrified expression. Perhaps outsiders did not know what kind of person the officer was, but these guards knew very well. As a veteran who had followed Kerwin all the way from his hometown, he was deeply trusted. Otherwise, he would not have taken on such a heavy responsibility as guarding the city hall. In theory, unless the tyrant was killed, he would not choose to betray even if he had to die. Because once he betrayed, not only would it mean that all the benefits and rewards would be confiscated, but his family and friends would also be implicated. But it was such a person who could not betray under any circumstances that he did not hesitate to submit to a woman he had never met. Anyone with half a brain would feel that something was wrong. Magic. This was the first thought that appeared in their minds after the shock. Perhaps only magic, which was full of mystery and was said to be able to do anything, could control and change a person's thoughts and ideas. Thinking of this, the guards who were lucky enough to survive could not help but shiver. They immediately turned and ran without another word. At this moment, no duty, no courage, no punishment, nothing could compare to the fear of the unknown. After returning home, the first thing they did was to take their belongings and families and escape, far away from this city where something big would most likely happen. At the same time, the woman was led by the officer. It did not take long for them to arrive at a room filled with all kinds of letters and papers. Several clerks in formal attire or long robes were busy copying and approving documents with their heads lowered, dealing with all kinds of complicated taxes and financial expenditures. Due to the excellent soundproofing, they did not realize what had just happened outside. In particular, the old man with a short beard sitting at the head of the table gave off a dignified and capable feeling. He was the actual ruler of the city under their feet, Kerwin's personal mayor and honorary lord. Apparently, he didn't realize that danger was approaching. He still didn't raise his head and asked, "Is there anyone who wants to see me?" The officer lowered his head and said nothing. It wasn't that he didn't want to speak, but the words seemed to be stuck in his throat, and he couldn't speak at all. The woman didn't even look at the military officer. She took 2 steps forward and asked with a voice full of temptation, "Tell me, where did you get the accurate information about Dark Church?" The old man shuddered and raised his head to look at the strange woman who had suddenly appeared in front of him. He frowned subconsciously. "Who are you? Why are you in my office?" "Oh, you are actually able to resist my hinting magic." The woman raised her eyebrows in surprise, but she immediately grabbed the man's collar. Relying on the powerful physical attributes bestowed upon her by the sacred sword, she forcefully pulled the adult man, who weighed more than 70 kilograms, up from the chair and threw him onto the ground with a bang. "Speak. Who gave you the information about Dark Church? Damn it. How dare you? Guards, quickly arrest this lunatic for me." The old man was undoubtedly enraged. His entire face turned red as he shouted loudly. But unfortunately, after several minutes, other than the motionless military officer, not a single guard appeared. At this moment, even a stupid person would realize that this city hall had already fallen into enemy hands. The guards on duty outside had either been killed or had fled or betrayed. Thinking of this, his complexion suddenly became gloomy. Who are you? Are you the leader of Dark Church? I warn you, you better not act recklessly. Otherwise, His Majesty Kerwin will not let you off. Kerwin? His Majesty? Ha ha ha. The woman raised the corner of her mouth and laughed heartily. While laughing, she also mocked, "Idiot. You don't know that he is actually a chess piece thrown by a powerful existence, right? A puppet who has nothing without the support of its master doesn't have the qualifications to become a king. Well, put away your senseless threats and tell me what I want to know." "No, never. Come, kill me. His Majesty will avenge me." The old man proudly raised his chin. He didn't have the slightest intention to shrink back. Of course, this was not because he didn't cherish his own life. Rather, he didn't care about the life of his family. In order to ensure the loyalty of his subordinates, Kerwin had arranged the family members of all the important officials to live in his city. If anyone dared to betray him, then their family members would certainly suffer inhumane slaughter. Fear. I can see fear in your eyes. You are afraid. It doesn't matter. Even if you don't speak, I can still get the information I want from other people. Finished speaking, the woman turned around and looked at those trembling scribes. Now let's play a game. I will ask and you will answer. Each answer will add 1 point. The person who gets 1 point will be able to leave here safely. The person who gets 2 points will not only be able to leave here, but will also get a reward of 1,000 gold coins. And the person who gets 3 points will get a magic ring, which can make you invisible for a short period of time. There is no doubt that coercion and bribery were always the simplest and most brutal way to break the psychological defense. In any case, the family members of scribes weren't taken away by Kerwin, so naturally they wouldn't mind exchanging the information in their hands for a large sum of money to escape. Looking at their face full of expectation and eagerness, the woman meaningfully shot a glance at the old man who was still in a daze. Then she calmly said, "First question, where did you get the information about Dark Church, as well as the location of our secret meeting?" I know. It's a letter." A man who seemed to be less than 30 years old reacted quickly and grabbed the precious first point. Chapter 1138. Letter. A curious expression appeared on the woman's face. She was completely unable to imagine how a mere letter could expose Dark Church, who had always been hiding in the dark under the sun. One must know that even if it was her, it was impossible for her to know all the scattered secret meeting places. The clerk hastily nodded and explained, "Yes, it is a letter, an anonymous letter. We also don't know who sent it. We only know that few days ago it suddenly appeared on the desk, and inside it, it detailed the threat of Dark Church as well as the current huge number of believers. To some extent, you have already threatened the rule of many cities, so naturally, you will become the target of suppression and elimination." "What about that letter? Let me see it." The woman put forward a further request. She had a premonition that this suppression of Dark Church was likely to be a conspiracy, forcing them to be unable to slowly develop in the dark. Rather, they had to stand under the sun and welcome the hostility of the entire world. Whether it was those major temples who were accustomed to receiving believers' donations and enjoying luxurious life, or those aristocrats who were accustomed to being aloof and controlling power, they would never allow a new rising force to snatch resources from their hands. It could be foreseen that Dark Church would usher in the most difficult period. If they could survive this period, then naturally they would have a wide open sea and sky. But if they couldn't survive this period, then they would lose their original good situation and would have to leave the densely populated cities and turn to the weak villages. "Please wait a moment." The clerk hastily ran to the desk of Lord, completely ignoring the angry expression of the old man. He opened the drawer and took out a slightly yellow envelope from the innermost part of the drawer. When the woman saw the remaining purple wax seal on the envelope, her pupils suddenly shrunk. Then she snatched the envelope and carefully read it. The more she read, the more her complexion became ugly. The reason was very simple. Not only the number of believers and range of activities that even she, the founder of Dark Church, didn't know about, there were also more than 100 exact secret meeting places. If before she was only suspicious, then now she was 100% sure that this was a huge conspiracy. The person who wrote the anonymous letter was even more knowledgeable about the development of Dark Church compared to the higher-ups of Dark Church. As for the faint magic energy emitted from the purple wax seal on the envelope, she understood that the other party was definitely a very powerful caster. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to afford this kind of expensive magic candle. Silence. Terrible silence. Everyone in the room, without exception, felt a strong sense of oppression, as well as anger that was about to erupt like a volcano. After a few minutes, the clerk cautiously asked, I've already answered 2 questions. Do you think you could give me 1,000 gold coins and let me leave? Don't worry. I'll give you the reward you deserve. But before that, tell me who first discovered this letter. The woman waved the letter in her hand with a chilling smile on her face. I don't know. It is said that she was first discovered by a maid who was in charge of cleaning. Later, for some unknown reason, she suddenly became a little crazy. Now, she's being held in a room that was originally used to store sundries. The clerk said everything he knew, whether it was betrayal or betrayal. As long as the first step was taken, there would naturally not be too much psychological pressure and burden in the future. He knew that there was no turning back. The only thing he could do was to take a large sum of money and leave Kerwin's territory as quickly as possible. Maid? Interesting, I want to see her. The woman casually threw the letter to the side and signaled the clerk to lead the way. Please come with me. Although the clerk wanted to refuse, but his reason kept reminding him that he must not refuse any request of the other party. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. So he obediently chose to comply. The moment he turned around, he suddenly felt a burst of indescribable horror. The next second, all the remaining people in the room were swallowed by the black smoke that gushed out from their body. Finally, they turned into ashes and drifted away with the wind. Their death was so strange that the clerk opened his eyes wide and covered his mouth with his hand. He was afraid that he would make a sound that he shouldn't make and also follow in the footsteps of the former. The woman acted as if she had just done a trivial matter. She used an emotionless voice to threaten him. Do you see? This is the end of those who become enemies with the Dark Church. The great Dark God is the only true God in this world. Any secular power is not worth mentioning in front of him. The moment he awakens, the whole world will tremble. Let's go. I still have a lot of mysteries to figure out. As you command, madam. The clerk humbly bent down and deeply bowed. From his eyes that were filled with fear, it wasn't difficult to judge that he was already scared out of his wits. He had strong awe towards this dark church that had appeared out of nowhere. After passing through the dark and narrow corridor and stairs, the 2 people quickly arrived at a storeroom located in the underground storeroom. Before the clerk took out the key to open the door, he heard a woman's crazy laughter coming from inside. While laughing, she was also muttering, "Chaos, destruction. The prelude of doomsday is beginning. Tremble, lowly mortals. You don't have much time left. It won't be long before the towering giant tree shrouds everyone's head. War, slaughter, chaos, death. We are nothing but a group of pitiful ants. Madam, she's already crazy. She's completely crazy. She doesn't even want to eat or drink. She's just saying crazy things that normal people can't understand." The clerk reminded her with a disgusted look. Crazy? Perhaps. But in my opinion, rather than saying she is crazy, it would be better to say that she saw something that she shouldn't see. Finished speaking, the woman directly pushed open the heavy wooden door. Then looking at the lifeless eyes of the young maid, she asked in an extremely gentle voice, "Tell me, child, what did you see? Who put that letter on the table?" The 16 or 17 years old maid suddenly shivered as if she had just woken up from a nightmare. She quickly curled up into a ball, then desperately shook her head and shouted, "No, I didn't see anything. I didn't see anything. Relax, don't be afraid. With me here, no one can harm you." The woman continued to patiently appease the mood of the other. She knew that in this kind of situation, the best way was to let the girl obtain a sense of security and have a strong dependence on her. Otherwise, Relying on the threat of violence would not only not get the information she wanted, it might even make the situation worse. Chapter 1139. Hurt. The maid raised her head abruptly, revealing a pair of strange, smiling faces. No, you are wrong. Who would harm a lowly and helpless servant like me? On the contrary, it is you, the hero with holy sword, the heaven's chosen one who is favored by the darkness. You are about to face the choice of your destiny. Who are you? Hearing these sudden remarks, the woman suddenly stood up, then pulled out her holy sword, which was emitting astonishing energy, and placed it on the neck of the other party. She looked nervous and frightened, because she knew that such frightening remarks should never come out from the mouth of a maid. To be more precise, how could a mere maid know such a secret? Ah, you are panicking. You are afraid to embrace your own destiny. As for who I am, it is not important. What is important is what kind of choice you're going to make. Do you know? Almost all the countries and major cities in this continent already know that you and the dark church you founded are a huge threat to them. At present, there are only two paths in front of you. One is to go underground and continue to endure the cruel suppression and defamation like a rat crossing the street. Until one day, when the majority of common people hear the name of Dark Church, they will be scared out of their wits. Tell me, is this the result you want? The young girl slightly raised her chin, revealing a pride and craziness which was not in line with the maid profession. Without a doubt, the one who was speaking at this moment was not her, but another powerful magic power. Then what about the other path? The woman narrowed her eyes, and her whole body emitted a dangerous aura. The other path is naturally like all the hero stories, raising the banner high to open the prelude of the era. Either kick away all the stumbling blocks that dare to block your path and finally fulfill the strong desire in your heart, or be cruelly suppressed and become a tragic and stirring epic. While saying these words, the young girl opened her arms as if she wanted to embrace something that didn't exist, and her tone was full of fanaticism. As for the clerk who was standing at the door, he had long been scared to the point that his whole body was trembling. Even if he didn't understand anything about magic power, he realized that this maid who had been locked up for several days was in fact no longer an ordinary peasant girl, but an extremely dangerous lunatic. Fortunately, the other party didn't do anything. Otherwise, the corpses of the staff in the city hall would have already begun to rot. The woman was silent for a few seconds, then sneered and replied, "Of course, I choose the latter. No one can dictate my fate. Not even your master can do it. Tell him that one day I will take back everything that belongs to me." Provoking master? Ha! I admire your courage, but at the same time, I despise your ignorance and arrogance. You don't understand the greatness of master, and you don't know that he has power that no god can have. The god of darkness that you are trying to awaken is nothing more than a bug that can be easily crushed in the eyes of the master. All right, I don't want to discourage you. In fact, I'm looking forward to the day when you stand in front of master and challenge him. Goodbye, believer of darkness. I will pass on your words to master. As the last word left her mouth, the young maid's body suddenly began to twitch violently. In the next second, bang, his real body instantly expanded before exploding into a bloody mist and minced flesh that filled the sky. Ugh! Such a cruel and bloody scene made the clerk unable to help but vomit while leaning against the wall. He quickly took off his blood-stained robe, leaving only a pair of tight-fitting shorts. In contrast, the woman was much calmer. She didn't even wipe off the blood on her face. She sneered and muttered to herself, "Darkness is the supreme power in this world. Nothing can be greater than it, and the god of darkness will be the most powerful god. Even if he isn't, I will personally send him to the throne in the clouds." After saying that, she directly threw a heavy leather bag at the clerk's feet and disappeared at the end of the corridor without looking back. The latter vomited everything in his stomach and immediately picked up the leather bag to take a look. He found that it was densely packed with golden coins. It was the promised 1,000 gold coins. In addition, there was a silver ring placed on top of the gold coins. When he put the ring on his finger, he found that he had disappeared into thin air. To be precise, he had entered a state of invisibility. There was no doubt that this made him ecstatic. Because on this planet where the development of technology and civilization was relatively backward, there were neither infrared nor electronic scanning detection devices, nor a large number of anti-invisibility magic. The only thing that could deal with invisible units was some animals with a keen sense of smell. However, these animals were quite troublesome to raise, far unlike the dogs on Earth. Except for the rich nobles and rich merchants, ordinary people absolutely could not afford to raise them. So with an invisibility ring, not only did he not have to worry about being hunted down, but he could also enter places where the security was lax and steel. When he thought that he didn't have to work hard for the rest of his life and could just lie at home and enjoy life, the clerk couldn't help but feel ecstatic. He quickly ran back to his home, wanting to share the good news with his beloved wife. But as soon as he got home, he found that something was wrong. For example, there was a pair of unfamiliar boots at the door of the room, and there was a fierce collision sound in the bedroom. In an instant, a bad premonition began to reverberate in his mind. In order to find out the truth, he carefully put on the invisibility ring and gently opened the door to look inside. As a result, the scene inside suddenly made his brain congeal with blood, and his eyes became red. At this time, his reason almost didn't last for a second and was completely defeated by impulse. The clerk didn't even bother to say a word of nonsense. He pulled out the dagger he carried with him for self-defense and pierced the chests of the adulterous couple on the bed from behind. Poof! Dark red blood splattered all over his head and face. But for some reason, not only did he not feel the disgust from before, but there was an inexplicable pleasure. Just like the saying goes, life's ups and downs come too quickly. It's really too exciting. With a complicated mood that he didn't know whether it was sadness, loss, excitement, or perverted, he simply packed his luggage and then embarked on the road of escape alone. The most important thing was that from this sudden killing, he found that he actually enjoyed the thrill of the sharp blade piercing the flesh, and he was not so angry about his wife's betrayal before. Chapter 1140. Master, I've done what you've instructed. That woman already knows what kind of challenge she's about to face. But what's interesting is that she's actually arrogant enough to challenge you, vowing to take back everything that belongs to her. Island stood in a room on the top floor of the magic tower, reporting to Zhang Cheng, who was sitting on a chair, deep in thought. It was clear that he was the one who had controlled the maid, and he was also the one who had used an extremely cruel method to kill her. To be more precise, he had done an experiment on that poor girl. Without a doubt, Zhangqing knew very well what kind of person this once righteous and compassionate young man had become. He nodded with a smile and said, "Well done. Continue to pay attention to the subsequent developments, and if anything interesting happens, remember to inform me. Remember, don't interfere too much, and don't help that woman." The so-called faith is actually the combination of will and belief. Under normal circumstances, if a person doesn't experience pain, suffering, and despair, their faith will never reach the point of being devout. But if a person can still retain his or her faith, then the power of faith he or she can provide is worth 100 or even 1,000 ordinary believers. So, you want to use this method to force those ordinary believers to become devout believers and provide more power of faith for the god of darkness? Allens asked in an uncertain tone. He didn't know much about the gods, and he hadn't even touched the threshold. After all, this world hadn't given birth to a true god yet. Even if there was one, they were still in a very ignorant state and hadn't awakened their own independent personality and consciousness. No, not only that, gods are never as powerful, omniscient, and omnipotent as mortals think. On the contrary, the characters and actions of gods are often determined by the strong obsession that mortals inject when they awaken. I don't want the god of darkness, Lua, to be a god who advocates peace and beauty when he wakes up, but a god who is filled with hatred and enmity towards the entire world. He should be a punisher, a disaster that falls from the sky, a god of destruction through and through. To obtain such a god, one must first make his believers hate this world. Zhang Cheng gently tapped the armrest of the chair and casually said something that would make countless people's hair stand on end. Compared to those who have been trained by society and rules to lose their edge and could only follow the existing order, he undoubtedly preferred those who dare to shout out, "It's not me who's wrong. It's the world that's wrong." It was because these people were easier to incite, to use, and to become his pawns. Islands nodded thoughtfully. So that's how it is. You want to create a god of darkness that meets your expectations. But I don't understand. What is the use of such a god to you? If he is filled with hatred for the world, he will definitely create a large amount of slaughter and destruction, which will have a very fatal impact on your arrangements. As I said, those arrangements are only for testing and collecting data. The real show is just beginning. Don't ask too much. Help me bury this under the roots of the tree of chaos. Be careful, it's been thirsty recently. Don't get swallowed by it. Zhang Cheng did not explain too much. Instead, he handed over something that looked like a fruit core. This is... Islands carefully took it, feeling the incomparably familiar energy within. It's just a seed. You just need to plant it. Zhang Cheng pursed his lips slightly, a strange light flashing in his eyes. The last time he showed such a look, it was when he used the youth as a lab rat. This time was naturally no exception. No anger, no fear, no sympathy, no sense of belonging. There was also no so-called friendship or family. As his fusion with the main core deepened, he could clearly sense that the things that could originally be classified as personality were gradually disappearing, replaced by a kind of indifference that kept people thousands of miles away. In his heart, he refused to integrate into any group and refused to have any emotional communication with anyone. He was like a precision machine, although he would occasionally do some casual things to pass the time. To be more precise, it was not just him. Almost all the rulers were like this. Perhaps it was the price they had to pay to become a part of the laws of the universe. Or perhaps, as the highest life forms, they disdained interacting with lower life forms. Over time, they became like this. Zhang Cheng was not too sure if this change was good or bad for the time being, but he believed that he would be able to get an answer from his other self the next time they met. At the same time, after knowing that she was about to face suppression from all over the world, the woman immediately went all out. She gathered more than 20,000 armed believers and launched an attack to occupy the tyrant city. She also announced to the public that she was establishing a communist nation. It had to be said that her actions undoubtedly made the originally chaotic situation even more chaotic. Bastard. Can someone tell me what the F***CK is going on? A whore who came out of nowhere actually led a group of lowly commoners to kill my officials and occupy my city. Kerwin waved his fists angrily as he roared at his subordinates. Even in his dreams, he did not dare to believe that such a huge mess had happened behind the scenes, just as he was gathering his forces to wait for Emperor Harrison to fall into a coma. A woman wanted to establish a communist nation? What a joke. He had yet to be crowned as king and establish his own dynasty. My apologies, my lord. It is our incompetence. It was only a few days ago that we learned from an anonymous letter that an organization called the Dark Church was spreading at an extremely fast speed. Not only us, but the surrounding countries also realized the seriousness of the problem and took the initiative to encircle and suppress them. But what no one expected was that they actually quietly transported a large amount of weapons and equipment into the city and started a rebellion to occupy the city. Right now, we don't have enough troops in the rear. Unless you are willing to give up on the invasion plan, we don't have enough troops to occupy a city defended by tens of thousands of people. A man in armor who looked like a noble knelt on one knee and described the entire matter from beginning to end. In other words, I either have to give up the prestige and large amounts of land at my fingertips and go back to quell the rebellion, or I have to let them go first and wait until this war is over before coming back to deal with them slowly. Kerwin's expression was somewhat gloomy. That's right. Temporary forbearance was for a better future. Moreover, those rebels can only occupy 1 or 2 cities at most. They won't be able to do anything. All right, let them be smug for a while. Pass down my orders. Have the assassins act immediately. I have endured enough. It is time for that old lion to leave. As you wish. Chapter 1141. The Orlas hunting ground was a royal hunting ground with a long history. It was also famous for having given birth to a great ruler. It was here that Harrison had accepted the mission and become the supreme ruler of the country. Despite internal and external troubles, he had used his perseverance to wipe out all his enemies. In the end, he had received the awe-inspiring nickname of Lion. Of course, as the place where he became famous, he liked the Orlas hunting ground very much. In his later years, he even spent a lot of money to hire the best designer in the continent to build a palace near the cliff. Just the marble, decorative metals, and gems alone cost hundreds of thousands of gold coins. It cost more than half of the country's annual tax revenue. However, as the ruler of the region, he naturally didn't have to pay for it himself. Instead, he forced the smaller countries to pay tribute. Right now, this exquisite and gorgeous palace had already been completed for 3 years. The walls were densely covered with vines, and roses were blooming on the vines. In addition, there were all kinds of unknown birds chirping on the branches. Even if one was depressed in their heart, they would slowly become more cheerful when they saw this. Unfortunately, no one was appreciating such a beautiful scene. That was because a few hours ago, Harrison had been shot by a crossbow arrow from a tree. The arrow had obviously been smeared with a terrifying poison, causing him to fall into a deep coma in just a few minutes. It must be known that with the absolute authority that Harrison had built up over the years, there was no other person in the country who could convince the people in such a short time and maintain political stability. No matter if it was the seemingly powerful ministers, the generals, or the princes who had a high chance of succeeding the throne, they all only obtained power with his permission. But now, he had lost the ability to give orders. For a moment, the seemingly powerful country was shrouded in a dark cloud of chaos and war. This was especially true for the people who had secretly colluded with each other. They had already sent out the news as soon as possible so that the princes or princesses they supported could prepare. The throne was never something that could be casually obtained. No matter if it was a normal or abnormal change of power, it would always be accompanied by slaughter and bloodshed. The only difference was that in a normal change of power, the loser basically had no way to resist. They could only obediently wait for their fate to descend. In comparison, an abnormal change of power had many tricks that could be played. Sometimes, the one who obtained the final victory would be the one who started off the most inconspicuous. How is it? Can His Majesty's body still hold up? How long will it take for him to wake up? Looking at the doctor who walked out of the bedroom, the aged Prime Minister was the first to step forward and grab the magistrate's arm, asking anxiously. It was impossible not to be nervous. He was Harrison's best friend. The two of them had gone through the most difficult times hand in hand. So no matter how big the domestic political situation was, his position of being second only to one person and above tens of thousands had never changed. Even the eldest son of the king, who had the right to inherit the throne, maintained a certain degree of reverence. If Harrison was still alive, this power would naturally bring unimaginable benefits. However, if he suddenly died, then this power would disappear instantly like a mirage. Not only would it disappear, it might even bring about a fatal disaster. After all, he had offended too many people over the years, and among them, there was no lack of powerful princes. If the old lion really couldn't make it, then he would have to start working with a prince before the situation completely went out of control. This would ensure that he would still be the prime minister of the empire in the next few years, or even 10 years. As for who Harrison wanted to succeed him, it was not important at all. Prime Minister, His Majesty's condition is not objective. The assassin is very sinister. He used an alchemy poison called arclight. It can enter the blood and cause the victim to fall into an inextricable hallucination and slowly die. A few spellcasters and I have worked together to temporarily stop the poison from spreading further. His Majesty's life is not in danger for now. However, at the same time, we can't predict when he will wake up, or if he will wake up. It's best that you prepare for the worst and choose a qualified successor for our country. The doctor did not try to hide anything, nor did he dare to hide anything. He told everything he knew. After saying this, he seemed to have unloaded a huge burden, and his entire person became much more relaxed. In contrast, the Prime Minister seemed to have picked up this burden and carried it on his back, almost suffocating from the pressure. He nodded with a serious expression. "All right, I understand. You may leave. Remember, do not reveal His Majesty's health to anyone. Not even the princes and princesses, understand?" "Understood. Please rest assured." The doctor bowed deeply, then turned and disappeared at the end of the heavily guarded corridor. However, the Prime Minister probably did not expect that not long after he left his sight, the doctor silently came to the entrance of a room. After looking left and right to make sure there was no one around, he gently pushed open the door and slipped in. As there was no light, the room was pitch black, and almost nothing could be seen clearly. However, the doctor did not panic at all. He quickly took out the note he had prepared beforehand and stuffed it under the pillow cushion at the head of the bed. He then quickly left the room, pretending that nothing had happened. About a few minutes later, a black shadow came out of the cabinet and took the note with practiced movements. Not long after, he brought the note through a secret passage to another room. He knelt on one knee and reported in an extremely excited tone, "Your Highness, your chance has come. I just received news that His Majesty has been poisoned. I'm afraid he won't have a chance to wake up. At this time, you only need to convince the 2 generals accompanying you, and you'll be able to take control of the palace before the other competitors react. Coerce the ministers to forge an edict and logically ascend to the throne." "Oh, are you sure?" The man, who looked to be in his 40s, turned around, a frightening light in his eyes. He was none other than Harrison's 4th son, and at the same time, his favorite son. He had always been by Harrison's side and taught him by example. However, for some reason, he had never given a clear signal to this prince, who looked and had a personality very similar to his, and had instead allowed him to fight for power with his other siblings. "Very sure. I paid a hefty price to bribe the doctor who specializes in treating His Majesty's illness. According to the servant's report, the Prime Minister has already sealed His Majesty's bedroom, and none of the servants who went and came out again." The black shadow raised his head, his eyes revealing a strong sense of expectation, as if waiting for his master to make a decision. Chapter 1142. None of the people in the center of power could resist the temptation of power. That was because power was not only a tool for them to realize their dreams and ambitions, but it was also the only way to ensure their survival. This was especially so for the few princes who had already turned against each other for the throne. They had already made up their minds to kill the few brothers and sisters who were the greatest threats after seizing the throne. Even if they could not do it directly, they would think of ways to throw them into a dangerous place to fend for themselves. Political struggles had always been a battle of life and death. Any feelings and kinship would be overshadowed in front of it. Everyone involved would do whatever it took to ensure that they could be the final victor, even if it meant sacrificing the last bit of humanity. After repeatedly confirming that his father had really fallen into a coma, Harrison's 4th son did not hesitate at all. He immediately roped in 2 generals to launch a coup. With lightning speed, he put all the important officials, including the Prime Minister, under house arrest and forced them to forge an edict to the throne. He wanted to make himself the legal successor as soon as possible. However, as the saying went, one had to complete the act. He was not in a hurry to sit on the throne. Instead, he returned to the capital in his father's name with great fanfare. He wanted to take this opportunity to take over the most densely populated, wealthiest, and most garrisoned city. Unfortunately, he was not the only one who had spent a lot of money to buy information. The other princes and princesses who were determined to fight for the throne were not to be trifled with either. They quickly saw through this plan and joined forces to take control of the city, slandering the former as the culprit who caused the emperor to fall into a coma. The whole thing was a conspiracy. Not only did they refuse to let the other party enter the city, they even used the excuse of eliminating the rebellion to prepare to start a war to determine who was the real successor. It had to be said that with Harrison's fall, the drawbacks of his previous practice of letting his children fight for power in order to pick the most outstanding successor were vividly reflected at this moment. To be precise, it was a complete disaster for the entire country. For a moment, the generals and nobles who had their own armies in various places could not help but start to encourage some of the marginalized princes and princesses who had no intention of participating in the fight for the throne to take the initiative to join this feast of power. The rulers of the vassal countries also took the opportunity to get rid of the officials in their country who were monitoring them and regain their power. They began to wait for the opportunity to take over the borders of this powerful country. Perhaps it was just as the saying went. When the old lion fell and the young lions were still fighting for the father's hunting ground, the hyenas would be waiting for the opportunity to take over the most delicious food they thought was the most delicious. How many days has it been? My brothers haven't won yet? A young girl in a white dress stood at the top of the tower, looking down at the fierce battle on the city walls. She was none other than the young princess who was engaged to Kerwin. Although I don't think the arrow will shoot so high, it's never wrong to be careful, an old knight said helplessly. To be honest, when he was assigned to the princess by Harrison, he thought it was a good position. He did not have to risk his life to participate in the fight for power, and he could go abroad to enjoy a beautiful and luxurious life. However, as the great emperor fell into a coma, all of this gradually became confusing. No one knew if the engagement would be fulfilled, and no one knew how the new ruler would deal with so many brothers and sisters after he ascended the throne. The princess stroked her long hair that was messed up by the wind and sneered at herself. Maybe being shot to death is a good ending. At least it's better than being locked up here all day and not being able to leave the door. Also, my stupid and short-sighted brothers did not realize that their actions not only caused the collapse of the entire country, but also gave many ambitious people an opportunity. Opportunity? You mean, before the knight could finish his words, a letter was suddenly stuffed in through the crack of the door. He quickly opened the door, only to find that there was no one in the corridor. The two guards in charge of guarding the door seemed to have fallen into some kind of trap and were sleeping soundly on the ground as if they did not notice anything that was happening outside. Strange, who would use this method to send a letter? The knight muttered softly as he closed the door and handed the letter to the princess he was loyal to. The latter did not say anything, took the letter, opened the wax seal, and carefully read the words on it. After a few minutes, the girl pursed her lips and said sarcastically, "As expected, that fiancé of mine can't hold back the desire in his heart and wants to use my name to get a foot in." "What? Kerwin? That upstart tyrant?" The knight's eyes widened, as if he could not believe what he had heard. In his eyes, no matter how turbulent and chaotic his country was, it was still the undisputed overlord of the surrounding area. But now, a mere country noble who had just risen to power wanted to pounce on him and tear off a piece of the juiciest meat. Why not? Look outside, those idiots who are still fighting endlessly for the throne. I'm afraid that their first reaction to this news will not be to unite against the enemy, but to think of ways to get the other party to support them and attack their competitors. His father's biggest mistake was to let his most capable children get caught up in endless internal strife instead of looking further ahead. They only see this country, but they do not see the constantly changing situation outside. Forget it. It's useless to say this now. My fiancé only informed me because he wants to test my attitude. Whether I agree or not, he will not change his plan. After saying that, the princess put the letter on the candle and lit it, her expression sad and helpless. If she could, she did not want to marry Kerwin at all. But the problem was that the choice was not in her hands from the beginning, but in the hands of her brothers. She believed that in order to fight for a powerful ally, these guys would not mind giving their sister away as a gift. But what they did not know was that what Kerwin wanted was not only a princess, but also a large piece of land and a legitimate crown. Chapter 1143. How was it? Did my lovely fiancé have any extreme reactions after receiving the letter? Kerwin sat in the military camp, inspecting the army that was ready to set out. He did not even turn around to ask the secret messenger come assassin who had just returned. It was this thin and unremarkable man who, with a single poison arrow, had caused a great ruler with great political influence to fall into a coma. At the same time, he had thrown the powerful country he had founded into chaos and turmoil. No, she is very calm, much calmer than you think. She is very clear about her situation. However, she has a message that she wants me to pass on to you. The thin man's tone did not have a trace of cadence. It was so calm that it was as if nothing had happened. Perhaps it was this extremely reserved and almost strict self-control that made him the most outstanding assassin on the continent. Whether it was a heavily guarded palace or a treasury filled with gold and silver coins, he could come and go as he pleased. Moreover, when he made a move, he would never reveal even the slightest bit of killing intent. "Oh, what is it?" Kerwin turned around with a playful smile. In truth, he had only written this letter to find an excuse to invade. Regardless of whether the other party agreed or not, he would cross the border according to his original plan and take over all the land west of the Long River. Of course, it would be better if the princess was willing to cooperate. It would save him a lot of unnecessary steps and trouble. She said that she can cooperate with you to put on a show, but in return, she doesn't want to be a simple puppet. She wants to share some of your power. The assassin did not try to hide what it was. He revealed the contents of his private conversation with the princess without changing a word. As a simple and pure person, he did not care about the schemes of these nobles. He only cared about the contents of his next mission, who he needed to kill, and how he needed to kill them. Power? Ha ha! Kerwin could not help but laugh loudly when he heard this. He laughed as he teased. "I thought she would make some kind of request. It turns out that she is not willing to continue being manipulated by others. She is not willing to continue being a flower vase. No matter, I can fulfill this small wish of hers. However, the prerequisite is that she has to do something to prove that she has severed all ties with her past." "What is it?" A hint of emotion finally appeared in the assassin's cold eyes. However, no one knew whether this fluctuation was due to curiosity or something else. "I hope she can take care of her unconscious father with her own hands." Harrison's political prestige was too high. As long as he was alive, the supporters of the princes and princesses would not dare to go all out. What's more, patricide is an evil that will never be tolerated by society. Don't you think that such a vicious woman is a perfect match for me? A tyrant? Kerwin pursed his lips into a cruel smile. There was no doubt that he was taking revenge on Princess Chu for her strong rejection of the marriage alliance. He wanted to use this underhanded method to drag her down to the same level as him. "Understood. I'll pass on your conditions to her. If there's nothing else, I'll be on my way to the next mission. Goodbye." With that said, the assassin did not hesitate at all. He bowed slightly and disappeared into the shadows of the corner of the tent. No one knew how he got out, and no one knew how he got in. Regardless of whether it was magic or other methods, there was no way to detect the stealth technique that allowed him to come and go without a trace. Even the hunting hounds with the best sense of smell could not be used. Fortunately, Kerwin did not care about the assassin's true identity, nor did he want to keep such a dangerous person by his side. Both parties were partners who benefited from each other's needs. Thinking of this, he pushed open the curtain of the tent and loudly ordered the herald who had been waiting outside for a long time. "Let our vanguard set off. Within 5 days, I want to conquer the nearest city. Within 2 months, I want to wipe out all resistance to the west of the river. Remember, this time is different from last time. I need a crown, so don't cause too much unnecessary killing. A piece of land without enough people will not be able to produce enough food and wealth to support country." "Yes, sir." The herald patted his chest hard, then jogged all the way to the army that was ready to move out to pass on the order. About half an hour later, the first batch of humans and steel golems crossed the border on a muddy path, approaching the powerful country that had fallen into chaos and war. On the other side, the army that belonged to the kingdom was still anxiously waiting for orders. To be exact, Vilya was still waiting for an opportunity, waiting for a suitable time to intervene. As for the excuse, She had already prepared it long ago. It was the prince who was under house arrest in the palace. As the nobles who started the rebellion were all caught in one fell swoop, this unlucky guy could not escape. Even with the title of messenger, he could not be saved in the end. Right now, he had lost his previous gentlemanly disguise. He kept pacing back and forth in the room, his eyes bloodshot. Occasionally, he would shout crazily. This was because he had not communicated with anyone face to face for more than half a month. The only time he could see outsiders was during the few short seconds when food was delivered every day. It was estimated that if he kept this extreme isolation from the world, in a few days, he would completely become a psychopath or a lunatic. Of course, he was not much better now. His mouth was constantly muttering something in a low voice. Any normal person would be shocked to see him like this. Just as the prince stared at himself in the mirror and began to talk, the closed door was suddenly kicked open with a bang. The queen, who had not been seen for many days, finally appeared. She greeted him with a smile. "Ah, good afternoon, my dear Royal Highness. I have good news and bad news here. Which one do you want to hear first?" Bad news. The prince made his choice without thinking. Just like the literal meaning, he did not even think about it. He just wanted to talk. The bad news is that your great father was assassinated and poisoned. He is now in a coma and has lost control of the country. Your brothers and sisters, on the other hand, are fighting for the throne. They even wrote me letters, hoping that I can imprison you forever. Vilya winked meaningfully. She believed that with the prince's political wisdom, it should not be difficult for him to judge the current situation. At the same time, he understood that other than relying on her, there was no other way for him to survive. Chapter 1144. What? My father was attacked by an assassin. How is that possible? The prince's eyes widened in disbelief. His father was the undisputed overlord of the surrounding area. Dozens of enemies had fallen at his feet, if not 100. If he could be assassinated so easily, he would have died 100 times over. Vilya was obviously satisfied with the prince's reaction. She spread out her hands with a faint smile. "Sorry, even though it's a little shocking, I can assure you that this is absolutely the truth. Right now, your brothers are fighting each other over the right to inherit the throne. One of them is even trying to take over the capital and be crowned in the cathedral. As far as I know, more than 30,000 soldiers have died in the battle. The blood and corpses have already dyed the moat black and red." Then what's the good news? After a brief moment of panic, the prince quickly regained his composure and continued to probe carefully. He understood that his current identity was a prisoner, so there was no reason and no need for Vilya to lie to him. If his powerful father really did not wake up, he had to think about his future instead of sitting here foolishly waiting for someone to pay the ransom to regain his freedom. The good news is that I think we can use your name to send an army to participate in this game. In return, after I help you ascend the throne, I need to give you a third of the country as a thank you gift. How about it? Do you agree? Vilya straightforwardly showed her appetite. Compared to Kerwin, her boldness and knowledge were undoubtedly better. No matter what, the kingdom was a perfect country with a large number of talents. As long as they were willing to spend extra money and energy, they could digest it very quickly. The people of the duchy that had been destroyed not long ago had basically gotten used to their new identities and no longer resisted the kingdom's rule. A third? A third? Are you crazy, or is there something wrong with my ears? Do you know what that means? It means that even if I sign the treaty, I will be torn to pieces by the angry nobles and civilians. They have enjoyed the supreme glory brought by my father for too long and are used to looking down on other countries from above. They will never allow a king who humiliates the country to appear. The prince clenched his fists tightly and roared loudly. Like all powerful countries, the citizens always had an inexplicable sense of superiority and strong self-confidence, believing that no enemy could defeat them. However, they did not understand that times were constantly changing. Regardless of whether it was a country or a civilization, there would always be ups and downs. Some would eventually die out with the passage of time. Especially when a powerful country began to decline rapidly, the first to feel it was not the country's ruling class, but its competitors and enemies. As for the citizens who had a pure reaction, they would only come to their senses when the bloody butcher's knife fell. They would flee while crying and reminiscing about the good times when they were strong. Crazy. Vilya shook his head with a confident smile. No, I'm not crazy. If you know that at this time, more than 6 countries, including Kerwin, have launched attacks from different directions, you will think how lenient and merciful my conditions are. Think about it. Will your brothers and sisters join forces to fight against external enemies? Or will they contact these invaders and pay a hefty price in exchange for their support? When the prince heard this, his expression changed drastically. He gritted his teeth and said sarcastically, "In their eyes, they are the real enemies. Naturally, they will not join forces. I really did not expect that the great country that my father founded would be on the verge of collapse after just 1 generation." It sounds a little ironic, doesn't it? It is ironic, but it is a good opportunity for me. Now, make your choice. Do you want to stay here as a captive for the rest of your life? Or do you want to fight with your brothers and sisters to see who is the real king? When he said this, Vilya's tone had a hint of mockery and ridicule. As someone who had experienced a palace coup, she knew all too well how crazy these people would be for that chair. I choose the latter. But you have to promise that you will never make any unreasonable demands, such as submission, tribute, and so on. The prince tried to argue for the sake of preserving the last bit of dignity for his country. No problem. I'm not an aggressive monarch. You don't need to be wary of me, but someone else. Look, he is the mastermind behind all of this, and he is also the one with the biggest appetite. As he spoke, Vilya took out a piece of paper filled with tiny words from his pocket and handed it over. The prince hurriedly took it and glanced at it. Suddenly, he roared furiously, "How dare he? He sent assassins to assassinate me." Then, he wanted to use my sister's name to seize the crown openly. No, I will never let this despicable person succeed. That's right. This is the momentum. Remember, if Kerwin's plan succeeds, then you and your country will eventually disappear, and he will establish a complete tyranny on the corpse of a huge empire. Come on, go take a shower and change your clothes. Let's discuss how to stop his conspiracy. In order to sow discord between the two sides, Vilya quietly removed herself from this conspiracy. As a woman, lying, deceiving, and acting were her innate instincts. In addition, her beautiful appearance was naturally deceptive. Appearance was justice, and it was not a patent of the people of Earth. On the contrary, this was a common problem of most intelligent life. As a wonderful drama that included conspiracy, assassination, politics, war, love, hate, and so on officially began, Islands had already arrived in front of the towering tree of chaos alone. Looking at this terrifying plant that he could not see the top of, he took a deep breath and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "All right, let me plant the seed next. I hope there are no accidents." As soon as he finished speaking, he took out the seed that looked like a wanrua seed, squatted down, and buried it in the soil where the roots were emitting chaotic energy. The next second, bang! A thick vine suddenly broke out of the soil and rolled the young man up at an unimaginable speed. No matter how he struggled or how he attacked the vine with magic to regain his freedom, in the end, he failed without exception. He could only watch as the rapidly growing vines pushed him into the air. Finally, he was stuffed into the gap on the tree trunk. His whole body was soaked in the green mucus that looked like paste. Soon, he lost consciousness. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1145. Nervousness, hesitation, helplessness. Islands felt as if his body was being disintegrated. His mind, which had been freed from the restraints of his body, became 10,000 times stronger. Even without eyes and ears, he could clearly sense everything that was happening within a radius of several hundred kilometers. It was obvious that this change was definitely not normal. He even suspected that the strange core had some sort of strange reaction with him. However, he soon realized that things were not as simple as he had imagined. This was because at the top of the chaos tree that reached into the clouds, a crystal-clear flower that emitted astonishing energy had already bloomed. In the center of the flower bud, The fruit that was nurtured by the planet's core energy was growing at an extremely fast speed. Islands, who had accidentally been swept into it, lay quietly in the center of the fruit. His body had long been disintegrated in the solution, leaving only his consciousness and soul intact. However, as time passed, his memories began to fade. In the end, not only did he forget everything that had happened in the past, he even forgot his own name and age. He was like a clean piece of white paper, waiting for someone to write whatever they wanted on it. It was unknown how much time had passed. Perhaps it was a few hours, a few days, or even a few months, when the blank soul spread out its consciousness aimlessly to observe the plants and animals that had been distorted by the chaotic energy. Zhang Cheng finally appeared through the teleportation gate. Looking at the fruit that was about to ripen, he pursed his lips slightly and muttered to himself, "Excellent. Looks like my plan has already succeeded by half. The next step is to wait patiently for the fruit to welcome its owner. I'm sorry, my dear servant, but this is the last use of you." After saying that, he channeled all the dark, evil, and chaotic thoughts in his mind into the soul that was like a piece of white paper. In the blink of an eye, the fruit that had been motionless exploded with intense negative emotions. For a moment, all the animals that were enveloped in the area let out miserable cries in unison, as if they had suffered some sort of terrifying attack. About 3 to 5 minutes later, a voice that struck directly at the soul asked loudly, "Who am I?" Unfortunately, most of the animals around had low intelligence and were unable to answer such a complicated and philosophical question. Only Zhang Qing asked meaningfully, "Who do you think you are? Or rather, what do you think the meaning of your existence is?" The meaning of existence. Islands fell into deep thought. Even though he was stronger, smarter, and better at thinking than ever before, he had to relearn all his memories and get to know the world all over again. How could he possibly answer such a profound question? Appreciating this young man who had been squeezed dry by him, Zhang Cheng suddenly opened his mouth and said in a slightly hazy and seductive voice, "Not bad. The meaning of existence. Every life that comes to this world bears some kind of responsibility or mission. Even the weakest and most humble life can find their own place in the huge cycle system. You are no exception. Then can you tell me the meaning of my existence?" Islands innocently took the initiative to ask, completely unaware that he had unknowingly fallen into a meticulously set trap. Of course I know. Can you feel the giant tree that gave birth to you? It represented chaos, the final form of the entire universe. You are the child that the giant tree gave birth to, and you will bring an unprecedented change to this planet. Zhang Cheng told a lie that he had prepared in advance. Like all the tricks that swindlers used, they first had to make the young man who had been reborn think that he was important, thus creating a feeling of arrogance and complacency. This way, he would subconsciously ignore the flaws that were not very obvious. Coupled with the preconceived notions, there was no need to worry about this guy having any thoughts of his own for a long time. A tool was a tool after all. Zhang Cheng was not stupid enough to devote his feelings to these guys, let alone treat them as friends or family. When dealing with tools, he would only hide his true intentions and use them until they died. To a certain extent, this was the privilege of the strong who had absolute power. They could control, change, and play with the fate of mortals at will. There was no need to ask to know that Islands was now the one being played. He probably would not know that he was no longer the same person until the day he died. Similarly, he would not understand that he was a pitiful test subject from the beginning. All the trust, respect, and guidance were just Zhang Cheng's disguise to hide the huge and grand plan in his heart. "I will bring about change?" Islands, who had lost his memories, was obviously shocked. Zhang Cheng deliberately pretended to be serious and nodded. "Yes. Your mission is to wait for the chosen one to come here after all the hardships and pluck you from the tree trunk. When that time comes, all the lives in this world will kneel down and listen to your voice. Now, try to use your energy to sense this world, sense the plants and animals that are rapidly changing. One day, you will understand what I said. Thank you for your guidance. I will remember it in my heart." With that, Alans no longer paid attention to anyone else. He focused on trying to use his ability to the greatest extent, constantly monitoring everything that was happening within a radius of several hundred kilometers. Seeing that this pitiful creature had been completely deceived by his lies, Zhang Cheng smiled mysteriously, then quickly disappeared without a trace. Since the fruit of chaos was about to ripen, the process of using the shell to hold it naturally had to be sped up. Otherwise, once the fruit ripened, it would definitely attract the attention of countless people. In particular, those rulers would definitely be full of curiosity about this little toy. He did not want to have his carefully prepared surprise ruined by some people with ulterior motives before it was completed, or even see his hidden trump card. Compared to the threat of the rulers, the natives of this planet were as harmless as docile little animals. After all, no matter how much they resisted or jumped, they could not escape Zhang Cheng's control. Not to mention, he had many backup plans that could ensure that no matter what happened at any time, he could calmly return everything to the right track. However, those rulers who were silently observing from the shadows would cause unimaginable damage to the entire plan once they made a move. Zhang Cheng wasn't sure how he would react if the sovereigns decided to interfere. Perhaps when that time came, he would have to use a frenzied and bloody battle to repel his enemies. Chapter 1146. Inconceivable. The basic order has actually been restored here. Walking on the slightly chaotic street of the city, Zhang Cheng looked at the reaction of the pedestrians with great interest, especially those fellows whose face was brimming with incomparably satisfied smile. Without a doubt, 1.5 months had already passed since the Dark Church launched armed insurrection and announced the establishment of their own country. As the first place to be forcibly occupied, the residents of this city had more or less accepted the new ruler, as well as the new rules, laws, and systems. The most important thing was, many people had voluntarily joined the church and became the believers of the Dark God in order to pay less taxes. For a time, one could see a large number of people wearing amulets and holy emblems. Among them, there were old people who were over 60 years old, and there were also children who occasionally gathered together to discuss the so-called doctrine. In such a rich religious atmosphere, the spiritual world of people was greatly satisfied, so much so that they even ignored the dangerous situation they had to face. It was as if there was nothing in the world that could stop the expansion of the church, and eventually it became the only faith in this continent. But in the eyes of Zhang Cheng, this was the typical herd mentality in social psychology. In order to avoid being isolated and excluded from the circle, every member of society would do their best to cater to the mainstream voice, even if they knew that it was wrong. There were also some idiots who, in the process of cater, actually began to hypnotize themselves, and over time they even believed in themselves. While walking along the street, while feeling the omnipresent power of faith, a man wearing a badge that symbolized his identity suddenly blocked his path. "Stop! Who are you? Why haven't I seen you before?" The man frowned and asked loudly. One must know that since the city was occupied by the Dark Church, in order to suppress this dangerous organization, the neighboring countries and other cities immediately adopted economic blockade. They ordered their own country's merchants not to do business in the area occupied by the Dark Church, and they also didn't allow the transportation of strategic materials such as salt, grain, weapons, metal, armor, and other strategic materials. The number of merchants and travelers suddenly reduced to a single digit, and there were very few unfamiliar faces. In simple terms, through economic blockade, the war potential of the Dark Church would be weakened to the greatest extent. If possible, it would be best to let the food fall into a situation where the supply of food couldn't meet the demand. But unfortunately, this sinister plan obviously didn't have the desired effect. After all, in this relatively backward world, except for a few very large city groups, most small and medium-sized cities relied on the farmland in their surrounding areas to support the citizens who did not engage in agricultural activities. Otherwise, just the loss of transportation alone would cost a lot of money. As the food supply system was relatively independent, the effects of the economic blockade were limited to the shortage of cloth, iron products, and some special tools. it did not have much of an impact on the lives of ordinary people. Are you asking me? Zhang Cheng stopped in his tracks and raised his head to look at the other party with interest. That's right. It's you. Answer my question. Where did you come from? And what is your purpose in coming to this city? The man subconsciously placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, assuming a threatening, attacking posture. Needless to say, he was most likely treating Zhang Cheng as a spy, or a spy who was secretly sabotaging. Haha, you're very cautious. You think that I'll do something that's detrimental to the church, right? Zhang Cheng was not angry. Instead, he could not help but laugh. That feeling was similar to a dragon encountering a puppy barking at it. It was far more interesting than offensive. Damn it, you really are a spy sent by the enemy. The man seemed to be a little angry. He immediately blew the whistle used for warning. When the ear-piercing whistle echoed in the streets, it was not long before more than 20 men wearing the same badge rushed over with weapons in their hands. Without saying anything, they first completely sealed off the entire alley, leaving no room for anyone to enter or leave. After doing all this, the leader asked while panting, "What happened?" "Captain, I found a spy sent by the enemy." The man pointed at Zhang Cheng, who was standing motionless, and answered quickly, "Spy." The leader was stunned for a moment. Then he asked in a non-committal tone, "Then where's the evidence? If you say that he's a spy, you must have evidence, right? The church is not like those nobles who trample on the law and rules. Before we have evidence, we can't just casually convict someone." I don't have evidence." The man shook his head helplessly. Then he immediately defended himself, but he just admitted that he wanted to harm the church. "Hey, don't you try to frame me. I've never said such a thing." Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows slightly. He directly interrupted the other party's attempt to convict him. It was always him who was framed and schemed against by others. Today, it was the first time in history that he was schemed against by an unknown person. The man obviously did not know how dangerous this seemingly harmless young man in front of him was. Unwilling to admit defeat, he rolled his eyes and immediately said, "Captain, he's not a local. He's an outsider. Think about it. Recently, we've captured outsiders alive. How many of them were sent by those hostile nobles? For the great God of darkness, we must protect this city and the believers living in it. Sometimes we could be a little more flexible and capture him for interrogation. If he's really not a spy, then let him out. Isn't that better?" What you said seems to make sense. "Sir, please come with us. I promise that as long as we explain everything clearly, you'll soon regain your freedom." The man who was called the captain accepted his subordinate's suggestion. No matter what, the most important thing was to ensure the safety and stability of the city. As long as the city was stable, the number of people who believed in the God of darkness would increase. The church would also develop rapidly and become an unstoppable force. As for whether or not they would offend a stranger because of this, it was not important at all. In the face of religion, personal will was always the most insignificant thing. Some fanatics would even be hostile to all groups of people who did not believe in their own religion and would swear to kill them all. "You want to capture me? Sorry, I'm afraid you don't have that ability. Forget it. Seeing that the woman did her best to work for me, I won't argue with you idiots." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Cheng abruptly spat out a large amount of crystal powder from his palm. In less than a second, those who came into contact with the crystal powder could not help but open their mouths and yawn. In less than half a minute, they fell to the ground with a plop and fell asleep. Idiots who have been fooled. I hope you won't choose to commit suicide when your faith collapses. Glancing at the believers who were in deep sleep on the ground, he curled his lips in disdain and strode toward the building with the huge statue. Chapter 1147. Religion and belief had always been irrational. It was mixed with too many strong emotions and impulses. Coupled with the herd effect mentioned in social psychology, even if it was a cult, it would still have a large number of loyal believers. Not to mention, Dark Church didn't force anyone to donate their property for the sake of property. Instead, they provided a meal for the poor who couldn't afford to eat every day to ensure that they wouldn't starve to death. In addition, the church had the support of God. Many talented priests could even obtain some simple divine spells. All of the above converged together, quickly forming a terrifying herd effect. Everyone was scrambling to show their loyalty to God and the church. At the same time, the social atmosphere had become more and more conservative, more and more xenophobic. So much so that whenever they saw a stranger, they would have a suspicious or hostile attitude. Feeling the abnormal and morbid fanaticism of the entire city, Zhangqing couldn't help but somewhat wanted to laugh. He even felt that the aboriginals of this planet were no different from the humans of Earth. Perhaps because they were weak, they needed to use concepts such as religion, nation, country, class, and so on to integrate themselves into a large group and rely on the strength of the group to protect themselves. Or perhaps because of stupidity. After all, no matter how much profound knowledge and information mortals received, they would never be able to change their primitive and low-level desires. Although to some extent, desire made them continuously evolve and unceasingly create a brilliant civilization. But uncontrolled desire would also bring disaster and destruction. Thinking while walking, Zhangqing unknowingly passed through the temporarily transformed temple. Looking up, he happened to see a huge statue standing in the middle of the hall. A man wearing a black robe was standing at the side, preaching the holy scripture to the kneeling and praying believers. Although these contents were fabricated not long ago and couldn't stand up to scrutiny, but the poor people who couldn't even read a few words were listening with great interest. They were either nodding or exclaiming. Just when he was staring at the string of belief behind the statue that was connected to the different world, the woman suddenly appeared beside him. Lowering her voice, she asked, "It's you? What are you doing here?" "What, I can't come. Don't forget, this statue was given to you by me." Zhangqing turned his head and revealed a smile, yet not a smile. "No, what I mean is, what is your purpose for coming here?" The woman vigilantly asked with a trace of hostility. She had personally experienced that underground adventure and understood how terrifying this seemingly harmless young man was. It was not an exaggeration to describe him as a monster in human skin. Zhangqing was keenly aware of the hostility and casually responded, "I heard that you said you wanted to take back everything that belongs to you from me, so I naturally came to take a look." "What, are you scared? Or do you think I'll kill this tiny church?" "You won't touch the dark church, because this is part of your plan. Everyone, including me, is just a pawn of yours. But don't forget, as long as the timing is right, a chess piece can also become a chess player, and the prey can also become a hunter." The woman suppressed the nervousness and impulsiveness in her heart and raised her chin arrogantly. "Ha ha, I admire your courage, and I hope you can keep it until the end. Do you know, there were many stories of heroes who fought against fate, but in fact, they often ended up in tragedy. This was not because those heroes were not firm enough, nor was it because they were too weak, but because the manipulation of fate was too powerful. So powerful that no matter how they resisted, it would only increase the fun of the process and not change the result. Now, I'll give you this sentence. I hope you can use fierce resistance to let me play this game to the end." While speaking, Zhangqing stretched out his right hand and impudently pinched the woman's cheek. His eyes were filled with playfulness and irony. There was no doubt that he liked chess pieces who could resist. The more they resisted, the more indescribable happiness he would feel. The woman undoubtedly felt humiliated, and the flame of anger unceasingly flickered in her pupils. After a full minute, she pushed away the hand pinching her cheek and said, "Show some respect. I'm not one of your servants who has completely lost themselves. I'm the chosen one of the great dark God, the one who is favored by the power of darkness. I was born to bring true faith to this world. You may be very powerful, but don't ever think of making me yield." Zhangqing didn't get angry because of this. He chuckled and nodded his head. "Of course. I respect your choice, and I also won't force you to do anything. Well, let's end this topic here. I still have more important things to discuss. I wonder if you have time now? Do I have the right to refuse? Come with me. This isn't the place to talk." The woman was clearly very calm. No matter how angry she was in her heart, she wouldn't joke about serious matters. Two people, one in front and one behind, passed through the spacious corridor, and after a short while, they arrived at a sealed office. Because it was rebuilt from the original city hall, a large number of the original decoration and design were preserved in this temple. There were even some relief sculptures of heroes in ancient myths and legends on the pillars. Along with the sound of the door closing, the woman returned to her seat and bluntly asked, "Speak. What's the matter? Don't tell me that you personally pushed the dark church to the surface and made us the enemy of the whole world for our own good." "Oh, why not?" Zhang Cheng pretended to be innocent and blinked his eyes. "Humph. Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child, so easy to deceive? You are the one who forced me into a dead end. Once besieged, millions of believers will die, and the church will also suffer a heavy blow. Without enough believers, there won't be enough faith power, and without enough faith power, there won't be a way to awaken the dark god. Now I'm beginning to doubt what your real purpose is in the end. Do you still want the dark god to descend?" The woman didn't conceal the resentment in her heart and vented it all out. "It seems you don't really understand what is true faith, right?" Zhang Cheng also sat down on the chair and crossed his hands in front of his chest. "What do you mean?" The woman subconsciously frowned. Zhang Cheng put on an "I'm doing this for your own good" expression and explained, "It's very simple. The so-called faith never refers to the number of believers, but the degree of piety. How much faith power do you think those pretentious fellows in the city can provide? I'm afraid they can't even compare to a holy disciple. So faith needs baptism. It needs the baptism of blood and death. Only those who are willing to sacrifice their life for the church, those who thought that they would sacrifice everything for God, can provide pious faith and awaken the dark god. Everything I'm doing is just accelerating this process, a painful process that you must go through." Chapter 1148. Obviously, in this world that had never produced a true God, no one knew what kind of power faith was, nor did they understand the relationship between God and faith. Even though the woman had always been wary of Zhang Cheng, she still believed him in the saying that faith requires a baptism of blood. Not long after, she began to order the church to form an army. While Kerwin was still invading other countries, she began to attack the surrounding towns and cities like crazy, not caring about the sacrifices. In just a week or two, she had double the area under her rule. With the expansion of the territory, the number of believers began to increase, especially the veterans who had participated in the war. Their faith gradually became more and more devout, and they were 100 times stronger than those who hid in the cities and did nothing. Needless to say, when the veterans felt the fragility of life and the threat of death, they treated religion as the only comfort. After all, with a God above them, they could naturally push everything to God. Afraid of death? That's fine. Just pray to God. If God thinks you are devout, He will bless you to live. Want to become rich? That's fine too. Continue to pray to God. As long as you are devout enough, God will bless you to become rich. Over time, God became a symbolic symbol, a hope for the future and a better life, a kind of spiritual and ideological anesthetic. Often, the poorer, the more painful, and the more difficult it was, the stronger the faith of mortals would be. This was because this was their only chance to change their fate. Just as the woman led her church army to attack the surrounding cities, far away in the capital where the flames of war were raging, the young and beautiful princess was being interrogated by a few of her brothers. One of the oldest among them questioned loudly, "My dear sister, can you explain why your fiancé suddenly crossed the border and is killing nobles without restraint and seizing their land? I've already warned you. Kerwin is a poisonous snake, and he could take advantage of the chaos to attack at any time, but did any of you listen? For the sake of the throne and the crown, you've all forgotten that this is a great country that Father created with his own hands. You've forgotten that if we don't unite, countless enemies will swarm in and constantly encroach on our territory and weaken our strength." The princess did not give any face to her elder brother at all. She generously lifted the last fig leaf. If she had a choice, she would never have married the ugly Kerwin, nor would she have worked with him to carve up her motherland. But there was no other way. As a young princess with no real power or military support, The only resources she could use were her young and beautiful appearance, as well as her seemingly noble but useless noble bloodline. Damn it, what do you know? This was a matter of orthodoxy. It was related to the lives and futures of countless subjects. The empire must not fall into the hands of a tyrant who killed his own father. We have been fighting for justice until now. The eldest prince scolded angrily. He clearly understood the essence of political games, which was to shout the noblest slogans and do the most despicable things. However, the princess did not buy it. She curled her lips in disdain and did not intend to continue arguing. Instead, she chose to remain silent. She knew that these fellows did not call her here to reprimand Kerwin for breaking the agreement and brazenly launching an invasion. They only wanted to find out how big his appetite was. After all, most of the vassals to the west of the river were supporting the other two heirs. They were even fighting endlessly for this, hoping to completely suppress the other party and then unify their forces to march towards the capital. It could be said that with the situation developing to this point, there was no place in the entire country that was not at war. For ambition, for power, for wealth, every nobleman involved was doing their best to obtain the final fruits of victory. As for whether or not their competitors were invaded by foreign forces, it was none of their business. They even wished that their competitors were all dead so that they did not have to expend extra effort. Under the feudal system, the selfishness of the nobles was vividly displayed at this time. Calm down, my dear brother. Don't scare our dear sister. Don't forget that Kerwin is using the name of protecting his fiancée. If she is really sick or injured, it will be troublesome for all of us. Another slightly younger prince reminded meaningfully. What do you think we should do? Of course we should send an envoy first. No matter what, Kerwin is our ally in name, if he is willing to help us quell the rebellion. So what if we give him some land? Don't you think that this country's territory is too large, and it will take a lot of time and effort to govern? That seems to make sense. Who do you think is suitable to be the envoy? Let Morris go. He followed father to see that tyrant before. Agreed. Seconded. In just a few words, the princes had settled the matter of sending an envoy to negotiate. They did not ask for the young princess's opinion during the entire process. When it was over, both sides did not even greet each other. They were so cold that they did not seem like siblings at all, but a group of strangers united for benefits. They were probably wary of each other and plotting against each other to ensure that they would be the final victor. After watching her brothers leave with their followers, the princess slowly stood up and asked without turning her head, "What about the things I asked you to prepare? How are the preparations?" "They are ready. You can do it yourself at any time." A black figure slowly emerged from the corner, his voice cold and emotionless. "Very good. Let's do it tonight. Remember, when I kill father with my own hands, you must escape within half an hour. Otherwise, no matter if it is you or me, we are both dead." The princess clenched her fists tightly, her eyes shining with a light called resolution. Patricide was undoubtedly a serious crime that went against ethics and morality. Rather than living like a statue for the rest of her life, she would rather bear this sin so that her unconscious father could be released early than become a tool used by her sons and daughters. "Don't worry, I have arranged everything." The black figure bowed slightly and quickly disappeared into the darkness again. Staring at the darkest corner of the room, the princess took a deep breath and muttered to herself in a voice that only she could hear, "Bear the evil name and become the tyrant's accomplice. Is this the future I am destined to have?" It sounds a bit ironic. Chapter 1149. The night always gave people a mysterious and quiet illusion, as if there were dangers and sins that could not be described with words. But in reality, the night was no different from the day. It was just that there was not enough light, so visibility was very low. When one's vision was blocked, it was inevitable that there would be some psychological fear. But at some point, the night gradually developed a close relationship with a series of despicable acts, such as plotting and scheming from a cultural perspective. And even when doing these things, they would subconsciously choose to do it at night instead of during the day. After a day of fierce fighting, Most of the soldiers in the barracks outside the city had already eaten their dinner and returned to their own tents to rest. Tomorrow morning, they would continue to work hard for this civil war that they did not know when it would end. Other than the occasional groans and screams of the wounded, the entire barracks was silent. Only the occasional footsteps of the patrolling team could be heard. No one noticed that two uninvited guests had silently snuck into one of the tents. And the person living in this tent was none other than Emperor Harrison, who had fallen into a deep coma after being poisoned. It had to be said that as the model of a great emperor, he was not in good condition at all. Not only was he emitting a foul stench, he had not bathed in a long time. Furthermore, he was as thin as a stick, and even breathing required all of his strength. It seemed like he would take his last breath at any time. Clearly, due to the rapid deterioration of the domestic situation, the various warlords who supported the princes and princesses were fighting each other, causing his value to decrease. Now, no one cared about the life and death of the once famous lion. They abandoned him in a corner of the camp without even a servant in charge of cleaning and feeding him. Pitiful, sad, lamentable. Looking at Harrison's current appearance, the princess had a complicated expression in her eyes. After a long while, she sighed slightly and said sarcastically, "My dear father, you probably never dreamed that you would end up like this, right? From a high and mighty king that no one dared to disobey, to a dirty and smelly old man who looked like a beggar. This difference is really lamentable. But it's okay. Hold on a little longer, and I will help you end your pain soon. Perhaps to others, death is full of the unknown and fear, but to you, death is closer to a release. Your Highness, please hurry. We don't have much time left," the assassin guarding the door reminded. "Don't worry, relax. Just look at the Orlos lion right now. Do you think anyone would care about his life or death? Moreover, don't you think that killing your own father requires a bit of ceremony? Otherwise, my fiancé will be very disappointed." After saying that, the princess slowly walked to Harrison's side, took out a small bottle of potion that was emitting a dark green glow, and poured it into the dying old man's mouth. In less than a minute, Harrison, who had been lying quietly waiting for death, suddenly began to twitch violently. He finally sat up abruptly and spat out a mouthful of black blood. "Cough, cough, cough. Where am I? Ah, dear father, you are awake at last. How is it? It doesn't feel good to be poisoned, does it?" The princess took out a white handkerchief and wiped the blood from the corner of the old man's mouth. "It doesn't feel good, right? It's you? I remember I was shot. Yes, he had been struck by a despicable and insidious poison arrow. He almost died. Where are my ministers? Where are my generals? Had they caught the assassin yet?" Harrison's mind was clearly in a mess. He had not realized how many things had happened while he was unconscious, and he did not understand that he had lost his most important authority. "Ha ha! Catch the assassin? You are too naive. Those brothers of mine, as well as the generals and ministers who seem to be loyal on the surface, have already treated you as a dead man. They are fighting endlessly for the huge inheritance you left behind. Those small countries that have submitted to you are also starting to get restless, trying to nibble at the borders. Also, the fiancé you chose for me, Kerwin. He has already taken over a large area of land, and it won't be long before he can seize the rightful crown." The princess laughed maniacally as she vented the depression in her heart. "What? How dare they? I'm not dead yet." Harrison struggled to sit up, a twisted expression of anger appearing on his skinny face. He had always been extremely conceited, and he had never thought that his ministers and generals would betray him. He had never imagined that the huge empire he had built would collapse. The princess smiled and shook her head. She pointed at the dirty and dark tents around her and said, "Wake up, father. Open your eyes and appreciate the place you are in. My brothers have long treated you as a worthless dead person." As soon as she finished speaking, Harrison spat out a mouthful of blood. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling, and his eyes were shooting out the last of his life force. There was no doubt that he was about to reach the end of his life in anger and anger. However, the princess obviously could not watch her father die slowly like this. She pulled out the dagger that she always carried with her, walked forward quickly, and plunged the sharp blade into his chest. No hesitation. No hesitation. There was only determination and decisiveness. You. Feeling the intense pain coming from his chest, Harrison opened his mouth wide. He wanted to say something several times, but in the end, he could not say anything. He slowly took his last breath with reluctance and regret. Farewell, Father. I hope you can find peace in the world of the dead. Also, don't worry about me. I have already prepared for the worst. After saying these sad words, the princess let go of the dagger that was already soaked in blood. She said to the assassin who was waiting at the door, I have done the last thing according to Kerwin's request. Now take me away. That dagger will be the evidence of my patricide. From tomorrow onwards, I will become a notorious bastard like him. As you wish, the assassin bowed slightly, ignoring the sarcasm in the princess's tone. No matter what, a woman who had just killed her own father was undoubtedly very dangerous, both mentally and physically. Although he was very confident in his skills, he did not want to provoke such a terrifying woman. Soon, under the cover of the night, the two of them quietly passed through the military camp. They rode on 2 horses hidden behind the forest and ran all the way. Before the sun rose, they escaped from this place that was dyed red with blood. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1150. The news of Harrison's death was only discovered by a passing soldier a few days later. It had to be said that it sounded a little ironic. After all, both sides of the war were using his name. But as the only legitimate ruler, he was only discovered after his corpse began to rot and stink after his death. What was even more shocking was that the dagger stabbed into the body was the birthday present that Harrison had given to his beloved daughter. It even had the princess's name and the date of its creation. Shocking, absurd, unbelievable. Everyone who heard the news could not understand why the princess, who was far away from the center of power, would take such a huge risk to assassinate her father, who loved her dearly. Many conspiracy theorists even believed that this was a setup. But soon, the princess who had escaped to Kerwin's camp stood up and openly admitted her act of patricide. She also announced that she was the queen and would treat the occupied area as her own country. Suddenly, everyone realized that this was all part of the tyrant's scheme. It would not be long before this crown would be legally placed on Kerwin's head through marriage. According to the tradition of the nobles, no one would see him as a nouveau riche. Instead, they would call him a prince or king. From a legal point of view, the husband of the queen could share half of the queen's rights. In addition, Kerwin was the one who held the power, so the so-called queen was just a puppet. Perhaps the act of patricide, which was despised by everyone, was also to make sure that the young princess had no way out. Enjoying the malicious curses, Kerwin sat in the castle that he had just conquered and asked his young and beautiful fiancée with a smile, Dear, how have you been feeling recently? Don't tell me you can't sleep because of the rumors. Do you want me to go to your room tonight and spend a wonderful night with you? Oof. Thank you for your kindness, but there's no need. I'm not that weak, and I won't go crazy because of some meaningless comments. Before the wedding, don't even think about taking a step into my room. The princess glanced at her fiancé with a cold smile. Clearly, the relationship between the two was not so much that of a father and a son. It was more like 2 enemies who had come together for their own interests. This was especially true for the latter, who longed to strangle the former with his own hands one day and hang his head on the city gate for all kinds of scavenging birds to eat. Moreover, the thought of him lying on top of her and doing disgusting things to her made her want to vomit. She believed that as long as she had the chance, she would not let go of the chance to seduce other men and make her future husband a cuckold. Hee, I like your reserved personality. It seems that we're becoming more and more compatible, aren't we? Kerwin was not an idiot. He knew that the beautiful woman in front of him hated him. But so what? In the face of great power and influence, she still had to obediently kneel down and let him toy with her. If it was in the past, perhaps he wouldn't hesitate in the slightest to use the most forceful method. He would first enjoy the body that was filled with temptation, and then slowly train it until it completely submitted. But now he began to like the sense of accomplishment that came from conquering a woman mentally. As the saying went, for men, no matter how beautiful a woman was, it was not worth cherishing if it was too easy to obtain. On the contrary, those women with arrogant personalities, although they might not necessarily be beautiful, could bring an unprecedented sense of satisfaction in the process of conquering. Although it sounded a little despicable, this was the most interesting part of human nature. The princess pursed her lips and mocked. Yes, a tyrant, a vicious woman who killed her own father. The two of us are indeed a good match. But I have a question. When do you plan to give me the power you promised? Don't worry, my dear. I haven't conquered the last 2 cities and 3 castles for you. Once I conquer them all, I will naturally hold a grand coronation ceremony. At that time, you will be the true queen. Similarly, our wedding will also be held on the same day. At that time, all the countries on this land will become our hunting targets. Saying this, Kerwin raised his cup and took a sip of honey wine. His eyes shone with the light of ambition. You better hurry up. I'm getting impatient. The princess deliberately pretended to be indifferent as she urged him. Of course, at most a week. I promise to personally wear the crown for you. Also, I'm looking forward to the night of the wedding. I'm looking forward to the service you provide for me in your queen's dress. After saying this suggestive sentence, Kerwin stood up and deliberately stopped his gaze on the other party's perky chest and slender waist. His expression was full of ambiguity and teasing. However, as soon as he stepped out of the tent, a knight who had recently joined the camp could not help but spit on the ground. Bah! Who does he think he is? How dare he humiliate you in front of your face? Your Highness, please give me a chance. I will recruit an elite team of assassins and directly send him to hell. No, you don't understand. He's not as rude and stupid as he looks. I can guarantee that if you send someone to assassinate him, not only will they not harm a single hair on his body, they will also take the opportunity to uproot him. What we need to do now is be patient, and patient until a suitable opportunity or a strong alliance appears. Before the princess could finish her words, a servant ran in from outside in a panic. His eyes kept looking left and right, as if he was afraid that someone would see him. Parker, why are you here? Didn't I ask you to keep an eye on the movements of the army outside? The knight hurriedly asked. The young servant quickly took out a sealed letter from his pocket and explained in a low voice, My lady, it's not that I disobeyed your orders, but a mysterious person suddenly stuffed this letter into my pocket. His movements were so stealthy that I didn't even have time to see his appearance clearly. A letter? The princess hurriedly took it and opened it, a trace of joy immediately appearing on her face. Your Highness, what does it say? The knight asked curiously. The princess quickly crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it into the brazier next to her. She replied unhurriedly, No, nothing, just a greeting from an old friend. Go about your business. I have to write a reply to this old friend. All right, if you need anything, please feel free to let me know. I'll be right outside. The knight obviously realized that the queen he was loyal to was hiding something from him, but he didn't dare to ask too much and chose to leave obediently. Seeing the two of them walk out of the tent, the princess let out a sigh of relief and muttered to herself, I didn't expect a letter from the Queen of Villia. Looks like we don't have to wait another 10 to 20 years like we originally planned. Chapter 1151. Blood, dark red blood. In the secret chamber under the temple, the woman was carefully cutting open the wrists of 6 captives, whose eyes were filled with fear and despair. Their blood flowed slowly along the grooves on the ground, eventually forming a complex and mysterious pattern. Needless to say, she was using her fresh life to carry out the most primitive, cruel, and bloody sacrificial activities, all for the sake of awakening the god of darkness as soon as possible. As the war continued, she began to hear an unusually vague voice echoing in her mind. Obviously, this voice was the god of darkness beginning to develop self-awareness, a strong sign that he was about to awaken. After confirming this, the woman would quietly bring some of the captives to the most secluded corner of the temple every once in a while and kill them to appease the violent divinity. Of course, this was not without a price. Almost every time she sacrificed, Her hair would turn white, and it would not take long for her to exhaust her vitality. But to the paranoid woman, there was nothing more important in this world than awakening the god of darkness, even if she had to sacrifice her own life for it. Some people didn't live to enjoy a luxurious life, nor did they pursue wealth and status. Instead, they lived for something called ideals and obsessions. As a lucky person who had been shrouded in darkness since childhood, or rather, blessed by it, she dreamed of seeing the materialization of darkness with her own eyes, which was the god of darkness born from it. Now, in order to achieve this goal, she not only abandoned her past, but also gambled on her future. Seeing the 6 captives bleed to death little by little, the woman's expression was full of piety and fanaticism. She prayed to the small statue in the shrine in a voice that only she could hear. "Great God of darkness, I offer the blood, lives, and souls of these mortals to you. May you come soon." Haha, do you think this scattered sacrifice can stimulate divinity and awaken a god from chaos? Accompanied by a familiar voice, Zhang Cheng suddenly stepped through the portal and appeared in the basement, which was emitting a pungent smell of blood. "It's you." The woman's pupils suddenly shrank. Zhang Cheng smiled and nodded. "Yes." I could feel the boiling divine power and the dark power that was becoming clearer and clearer. The God you serve is awakening, and if nothing goes wrong, in 10 or 20 years, he will leave the chaos and appear in the world as a true God. Unfortunately, I can't wait that long, and you can't wait that long either. Why don't we speed up a little? How do you know I can't wait that long? The woman sneered and asked, "Don't put on an act in front of me. You know your own body the best. Although the holy sword has strengthened your body, your soul is deteriorating under the constant erosion of divine power. At most 5 years, you can't withstand the divine power. Of course, there's still a 1 in 1,000 chance that you'll be able to transform into a holy spirit in the instant you collapse," Zhang Chang said with a hint of a smile on his face. "Humph. A person like you who has no faith will never be able to understand what kind of miracles a chosen with a devout faith can create." The woman didn't get angry after being exposed. Instead, she just mocked him without hurting him. This was because she understood that she couldn't do anything to the man in front of her for the time being. She wasn't even sure if that powerful holy sword would obey her will if she made a move. Hee hee, perhaps. Why? Don't you want to hear my advice? Although this method is full of danger, the benefits, if it succeeds, are great. Remember, divinity is something that needs blood and the soul to be comforted in order to grow. If you wish for the God you serve to awaken quickly, do as the letter says. Don't forget, you and your church don't have much time. Once those ambitious fellows complete their strategy, they will definitely turn around and deal with you. Then, you will become the target of public criticism and receive the malice of the whole world. After saying this, Zhang Cheng threw an envelope on the table and disappeared without a trace. The woman stared at the place where he had been standing for a full 10 minutes before carefully opening the envelope. In the end, after reading only 2 lines, he began to tremble uncontrollably. It was obvious that he was frightened by the content. She had dared to spread a plague in a densely populated city, causing tens of thousands of innocent people to lose their lives and turning the bustling city into a ghost town in a short period of time. But now, even a person like her who had no scruples couldn't help but feel fear. From this, it could be seen how astonishing the contents were. She didn't know how much time had passed. Perhaps it was several minutes. Perhaps it was several hours. She finally relaxed her taut nerves. Then, narrowing her eyes, she said sarcastically, "Contribute a city and then sacrifice all the residents inside? Only you can think of such a thing. If I do this, I'm afraid Dark Church will immediately be labeled as evil and will never be able to get rid of it. No, I won't let you get what you want." Just as her voice fell, suddenly, the closed door of the basement was knocked, and a nervous and hurried voice passed through the crack of the door. Madam, not good. That tyrant. He has returned with the army. According to the report of the spies, he will arrive here in 2 days at most and launch an attack on us." What? The complexion of the woman suddenly changed. She wasn't a fool. she immediately realized that she didn't have a choice from the beginning. It was impossible for her to defeat Kerwin's army of monsters and steel puppets by relying on a group of mobs that were temporarily put together. 2 days was just enough for the church to concentrate their forces and capture the small towns in the vicinity of the base, and then complete the cruel and bloody sacrificial ceremony. She could either awaken the god of darkness or be crushed by the incoming army. In front of her, there were only these two paths. For a moment, the woman was caught in a dilemma. Fortunately, being indecisive was never her character. After careful consideration, she immediately ordered the people outside the door. Go and gather all the believers who can pick up weapons. After 1 hour, we will set out, give up defending this city, and attack the nearby Makkah town. Attack! Attack! The people outside the door were clearly dumbfounded. They didn't dare to believe that the leader of the church would make such an inconceivable decision. Don't ask. Hurry up and do it. This is our last chance to turn defeat into victory. For the sake of the god of darkness, every believer must make a sacrifice, a great sacrifice. Understood. I will go right away. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1152. Ha ha ha. Resist? That's just wishful thinking. She really couldn't escape the fate of being a pawn. Through the magic mirror, Zhang Cheng could clearly see the scene of the entire city being mobilized. He couldn't help but laugh unscrupulously. There was no doubt that the woman had chosen to submit to the situation he had created, rather than face Kerwin's army and create a miracle. From his point alone, it was not difficult to see that she could not become the heroic hero in many stories who would submit to even the most powerful enemy. On the contrary, the cruel reality made her understand the painful price to pay to become a heroic hero. Therefore, she resolutely chose to become a dark hero, using the blood and death of others to build her own great cause. Master, are you sure that these crazy fellows can really awaken a dark god by sacrificing 2 cities? Isolde had walked in from outside at some point, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. He couldn't help but be curious. As a powerful spellcaster, he had clearly realized that there was no such thing as a true god in this world. The gods worshipped in the temples were actually created by humans. They were either used to satisfy the foolish spiritual sustenance of ordinary people, or used to amass wealth or participate in political activities. Otherwise, if there really was a god, he would definitely send down divine punishment to kill all the greedy and licentious clerics. A true god might not necessarily answer the prayers of ordinary people, but he would definitely not allow anyone to use his name to cheat others. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? Zhang Cheng shook his head noncommittally. You have to understand that sacrifice is an extreme way to stimulate divinity. It's like someone splashing ice water on your face when you're asleep. Whether you can wake up or not depends not only on how cold the ice water is, but also on how tired you are and how deep your sleep is. I see. I think I understand. Isolde's face showed a thoughtful expression, but not long after, he couldn't help but ask, since it's a gamble, why didn't they choose to fight a more secure defensive battle? As far as I know, most of Kerwin's main forces didn't come back with him. If they defended the city, there should be a high chance of success. You don't understand, and you can't understand the way religious believers think when they fall into fanaticism. They were irrational and would never analyze things from an objective point of view. They would only blindly believe what they wanted to believe. Now, there was only one path before these dark believers, and that was to awaken God and get God to help them get rid of all their enemies. In their eyes, God was omnipotent. He was their greatest support and backer. Therefore, every time their faith collapsed, there would be countless people who couldn't accept the reality and chose to commit suicide. All right, let's not talk about these stupid things. Tell me about the queen you're assisting. Is she preparing to deal with Kerwin? Zhang Cheng changed the topic and took the initiative to mention Vilya's private actions. Conspiracy, betrayal, chaos, murder. The script that he had created was progressing in an orderly manner. other than the group of parasites that were hiding on the island and quietly improving their technology and preparing to appear in a crushing manner. Everything else was under their control. When the parasites on human bodies crossed the sea and started the war, they would be surprised to find that this world was no longer the world they knew, but a crazy world full of danger and chaos. That young girl did well. She has already contacted Kerwin's fiancé, and it won't be long before there are concrete actions. Now that I think about it, two women full of hatred are really scary. If I were Kerwin, I would definitely regret messing with them, Isolt said in a half-joking tone. It was not difficult to see from the ridicule in his eyes that he was in a state of gloating at the moment. After all, it was quite ironic that a tyrant whose heart was filled with male supremacy was defeated by two young and beautiful women. If they really succeeded in the end, Kerwin would definitely be nailed to the pillar of shame in history. In the future, whenever people mentioned the two strong women, they would definitely drag Kerwin out and ridicule him for not being able to defeat two women. However, these people would never understand that the real reason for the tyrant's failure was not because he had offended the women, but because he had offended the seemingly harmless but actually dangerous man in front of him. So what's the plan? What specific plans do they have? Zhang Cheng gently tapped on the armrest of the chair with great interest. Isolt shook his head helplessly. There are no specific plans for now, just a channel to exchange information and information. I think they need some time to get to know each other and gain each other's trust. Only when there is a foundation of trust, then they will start to plan the next step. You have to understand that women have always been very patient. They will plan for years, decades, or even a lifetime to take revenge on someone. I don't want to experience the feeling of being stared at all the time. Ha, scary women. Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and revealed a playful smile. You know what? Many men think that they are stronger, smarter, and more intelligent than women, but in reality, when they really become enemies with a woman, they will quickly realize that women are far stronger than men in certain aspects. Especially when they give up everything and devote themselves to one thing. You will realize that women are more patient and willful than men. You're right. I suddenly realized how wrong I was in the past. Fortunately, my wife passed away more than 10 years ago, and I have no intention of remarrying. Otherwise, I would probably have to sleep with one eye open. Isolt sighed with a bitter smile. However, after sighing, he immediately looked around and pretended to ask casually, "By the way, where is Islands? Why haven't I seen him recently?" "Islands? I gave him a long-term mission. You won't see him for a long time." Zhang Cheng answered meaningfully. "Mission? Is it important?" Isolt carefully probed. "Yes, very important. It can even be said that nothing is more important than what he is in charge of. He is the most important part of the entire plan and will bring unprecedented changes to this world." Chapter 1153. At the port of the island kingdom, groups of ordinary people who had been parasitized were busy loading all kinds of supplies. In just a few months, weapons, armor, food, arrows, explosives, and some special items that had been modified using existing magical techniques were all gathered together to prepare for the upcoming invasion war. Unlike humans, who had endless desires and selfish nature, they communicated with each other through a mental network and were absolutely obedient to the collective consciousness. In this way, in terms of efficiency and organizational ability, they could easily leave other intelligent races behind. Report: Warehouse number 15 is full of supplies. Warehouse number 12 is short of 12 boxes of steel ingots. Please send them as soon as possible. The flour in warehouse number 3 is damp. It needs to be moved to a dry place for treatment. 2 cans in warehouse number 33 were bitten by rats. A small amount of oil leaked out. There's a risk of fire. Please send someone to deal with it as soon as possible. As a large amount of information appeared on the mental network, those in charge of this work began to follow up and deal with it in an orderly manner. So, all of this was like a precision machine. Every person controlled by the parasites was a part of the machine. If one was broken, another would immediately replace it. It could be said that from the beginning, this country was a war machine that was operating at full capacity. With their innate knowledge and improvement of existing technology, those little parasites successfully improved the technological level of the island by a large margin, leaving the other countries on the two continents far behind. Normally, a country like this that had just entered the age of firearms and had an awe-inspiring artillery fleet would definitely be able to support the glorious hegemony of the 18th to 19th centuries like the British Empire. Unfortunately, the two uncertain factors, magic and God, made these little parasites full of vigilance and awe. They did not even dare to infiltrate the inland and only established a stronghold to collect and transmit information. They had no idea that their every move had been seen by Zhang Cheng in a magic tower on the other side of the sea. He chuckled and commented, "These little things are really cautious. As the creator, when do you think they will start to attack the continent?" "I don't know. Don't forget that the nature of these little things is chaos. Chaos means that they cannot be predicted. Every time they invaded a planet, they would make appropriate changes to ensure that they were integrated with the surrounding environment and not directly exposed to hostile gazes. Caution is a prerequisite for the survival and development of a race. Otherwise, it's very easy to be exposed to danger prematurely," Gru replied casually. He, who had visited the magic tower again, was sitting on a chair like a human, sipping hot mint tea in small sips. It could be seen that compared to the previous time, when he was exhausted, he seemed to be very relaxed today, as if the danger from before no longer existed. "But your children are a little too slow. If this continues, when the god of darkness is awakened, their pitiful technological lead will soon be crushed by the power of faith." Zhang Cheng undoubtedly noticed the change in attitude and pretended to be kind as he reminded them. However, Gru waved his insect-like limbs nonchalantly. "It doesn't matter. Even if they launch an invasion now, they won't be able to defeat the tree of chaos you planted. I have to say that you are indeed crazy and bold enough to use the core of a planet as nourishment and the dead souls as seeds to create an unprecedented miracle, a manifestation of chaos. All the rulers, including me, are very interested in your plan and are eager to see the final result." "Oh, you know what I'm trying to do?" Zhang Cheng asked in an uncertain tone. "No, we don't know. But that's precisely why we're curious. Because you're different from all of us, especially here." Gru knocked his head lightly. "You're a lunatic with countless strange ideas. Madness gives you unimaginable courage, and being unrestrained gives you wings to your mind. No matter what the final result is, I will offer my sincere admiration. The entire universe has become more exciting because of you." "Ha! Does that mean I can be a little proud?" Zhang Cheng asked with a big laugh. However, his eyes flickered with a dangerous glint as if he would turn hostile at any moment. "Don't be agitated. Calm down. Do you still remember? I'm not your enemy. On the contrary, your enemy has never been us, but the other you. According to the latest news, that fellow has already obtained the taboo. I believe that it won't be long before you hear news of a ruler's death. True death." When he said this, Gru's tone revealed boundless heaviness. No one knew better than him what the true death of a ruler would mean for the universe and the other rulers. It would be an earth-shattering battle. No compromise. No negotiation. There would only be a battle to the death. When Zhang Cheng heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. As he laughed, he mocked. "Taboo? The way I see it, there are no such things as taboo in this universe. The so-called taboo is just a bunch of cowards. They fear death and change, so they try to cover up the objective laws that already exist. Since rulers can be killed, they can't be called eternal. Since they aren't eternal, where did the taboo come from? Tell me, my dear friend, are you afraid of death?" "Of course. There's no life form that isn't afraid of death, even if I know where I'll go after death." "Maybe you're right. Since we can be killed, what right do we have to call ourselves eternal? The subsequent nothingness is another form of existence in the universe. The part that is erased is also part of the entire huge cycle. The universe is deeper and more complex than we understand. We can't represent the will of the universe. At most, we can only be considered as the controller of a small part of the laws. Please continue your research and experiments." Use the results to prove to us that you're right and we're wrong. With that, Gru stood up, tore through space, and disappeared from the three-dimensional universe. Looking at the slowly closing rift, Zhongqing chuckled and muttered to himself, "Prove? I will. Soon, you'll see with your own eyes what the absolute truth is, what the true state of the universe is." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1154. Praise you, great God of darkness. Please accept our devout sacrifices. Listen to the painful wails of these unbelievers. Use their blood and souls to comfort your divinity. Come, believers of darkness, slit the enemy's throat. Dye this city red with blood. Accompanied by the fanatical chanting, in a city that had just been conquered, countless contorted invaders raised their butcher's knives and started an unprecedented massacre, regardless of gender or age. No mercy, no forgiveness. They did not allow some people to join the church and become believers of darkness like in the past. They seemed to have gone mad as they slit the throats of every living person, admiring them as they fell into a pool of blood and desperately tried to cover their main arteries that were constantly spurting blood. Unfortunately, this was completely futile. Within a few minutes, they would either die from excessive blood loss or suffocate due to the blood blocking their trachea. The most terrifying thing was that with every death, the air in the city would become a little gloomier. The sky also seemed to be shrouded by a mass of dark clouds. It was so gloomy that the sun could not be seen at all. As the initiator of all this, the woman raised her head and silently looked at the sky. She felt the extremely dense negative emotions gathered together and the huge shadow hidden behind the dark clouds that led to another space. There was no doubt. That shadow that was becoming more and more substantial was the god of darkness, Lua, who was about to awaken from the chaos. The current him already possessed a preliminary level of consciousness and knew what things were beneficial to him and what things were harmful to him. In the process of frantically devouring, he did not forget to give a portion of his divine power back to the believers below. Every person who felt their power growing continuously knelt on the ground at the same time and shouted themselves hoarse as they praised the great God. At this moment, they finally understood that the god of darkness was not imaginary, nor was he a false god worshipped in those shrines. On the contrary, he was a real god of darkness who could communicate with his believers and give them feedback. As long as they were pious enough and contributed enough to the church, they would receive the corresponding feedback and rewards. What a wonderful scene. I'm only one step away from success. The woman pursed her lips and muttered to herself with an infatuated expression. However, before she could be happy for a while, a travel-worn scout rushed over from afar on a horse and fell to the ground with a thump. He hurriedly reported, "Madam, the enemy is here. The vanguard of Kerwin's army is less than 10 kilometers away from us. 5,000 infantry, 2,000 cavalry, 500 steel golems, and an uncountable number of monsters." What? Why is it so fast? The woman's pupils suddenly contracted. He didn't attack the cities we occupied. Instead, he circled around them, intending to eliminate the main force first. "Get ready, we have no chance to escape." Just as he finished speaking, the scout rolled his eyes and fainted. Dark red blood seeped out from the side of his clothes. Needless to say, he was heavily injured. If he hadn't held his breath, he probably wouldn't have made it on the road. Damn it, the tyrant was here. What should we do next? Retreat to attack the next city? Or, another senior member of the church asked cautiously, "No, we don't have time to attack the next city. Close the city gates. Throw all the corpses outside. Prepare to defend the city. This time, I'm afraid we'll have to fight a bloody battle with the enemy. For the great god of darkness, even if we have to fight to the last man, we must not retreat. Don't forget, God is watching us from above." The woman raised her holy sword and shouted loudly to boost the morale. For the great god of darkness, for the church, for the devout faith, fight to the death with the tyrant. Under the double stimulation of words and miracles, These fanatical madmen who had lost their minds completely ignored the signs of exhaustion from their bodies and once again threw themselves into the vigorous defense preparations. In just 2 hours, most of the corpses were thrown outside the city. At the same time, they demolished a large number of houses and moved the stones and wood up the city walls, intending to give the enemy a big surprise. As the entire city's residents were almost completely wiped out, they didn't have to worry too much about their backs. By the time the vanguard cavalry arrived, the city had become a full-fledged war fortress. Although the bloodstains on the city walls had not completely dried up, the church's army stood on top of it, ready for battle. Their bodies emitted a bloodthirsty glow. At this moment, these people no longer had any fear. Their minds were filled with thoughts of how to die in the most heroic way, then return to the embrace of God and enjoy the beautiful life after death. Oh my God, these madmen have just taken down a strong city, and they didn't even slack off? And what's with those mountains of corpses? They can't be. At this point, the cavalry commander suddenly choked on his words. This was because he saw a young face. It was his own nephew. "Sir, please calm down. Don't be rash. We are cavalry. We don't have any engineering tools." The adjutant at the side seemed to have noticed this as well, and immediately pulled the commander's arm tightly, afraid that he would give an irrational order. Phew! The cavalry commander took a deep breath and replied with a gloomy voice, "Don't worry about me. I'm very calm. Since these bastards aren't even willing to let go of a teenager, they naturally have no value in living. Go inform His Majesty Kerwin. Tell him that there are no longer any subjects in the city." "You mean?" The adjutant's expression changed slightly. "That's right. What I mean is to let his tyrant's side completely show. Since our enemy wants to defend to the death, why don't we fulfill their wish?" The cavalry commander opened his mouth, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. No matter how one looked at it, it was a sinister and terrifying feeling. The adjutant shivered subconsciously. He turned around and yelled at one of the messengers, "Idiot! Didn't you hear the commander's order? Go and carry it out." "Yes, sir." The messenger hurriedly replied, and rode his horse towards the direction of the main army, without looking back. Anyone who was not an idiot could feel the killing intent emanating from the cavalry commander's body, and he did not even bother to hide it. He wanted to use the enemy's blood and death as a sacrifice to his dead relatives. If there were no accidents, this would be a battle without captives, a complete massacre. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1155. There was no doubt that as a tyrant, Kerwin's patience was not very good. So when the army arrived outside the city, he didn't give his soldiers any time to rest and directly issued the order to attack. Under the operation of a large number of craftsmen, single-armed giant catapults were quickly assembled. The head-sized stones drew a beautiful and deadly parabola as they rumbled and smashed into sections of the city walls and the roofs of buildings. Relying on the huge mechanical power and kinetic energy, basically every collision would bring about disastrous casualties. Especially the feeling of helplessness when looking at death with their own eyes and not being able to do anything was enough to destroy the psychological defense of the vast majority of ordinary soldiers. Fortunately, under the support of the religious fanaticism, these believers of the Dark Church not only didn't collapse, instead they shouted the slogan of sacrificing themselves for God and launched a fierce battle with the enemy that climbed up. In just a short time, large sections of the city walls were dyed red with blood. In some places where the battle was fierce, even the escalators couldn't be fixed. Because there was too much blood on the ground, as long as the ladder was placed on the ground, it would uncontrollably slide to both sides. As for the corpses, they piled up into a wall of flesh. The climbers had to first flip over the corpses to find a place to rest. My God, aren't these guys just a mob? How can they be so crazy? They actually stopped several rounds of attacks. Kerwin raised the monocular inlaid with gemstones and slightly opened his mouth to reveal a surprised expression. It must be known that in his plan, such a large number of soldiers who were promoted from commoners would never be able to fight a hard battle. At most, about 10% of them would die and their morale would fall to the bottom. They couldn't help but turn around and flee. But now, not to mention fleeing, they didn't even have the courage to retreat. He even saw a few teenagers pushing a knight who had climbed up the city wall to the ground. Then, they stabbed their sharp, short swords into the gaps of the knight's armor and stabbed him to death. In addition, there were some old people who were over 60 years old who stubbornly defended the front line. No matter how heavy their injuries were, they would never retreat. How could this be a mob? Even if the most elite army of all the countries on the continent were pulled out, it would be impossible for them to fight to the last moment. Nervous, uneasy, terrified. For the first time, he felt fear towards these ordinary people who he had looked down upon. He urgently wanted to know what had changed them from a group of docile sheep to a pack of vicious wolves. Your Majesty, I suggest that you postpone your attack. Let's send out a few informants to find out what's going on in the city. I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right, Baron Kalin suggested with narrowed eyes. As the #1 loyal lackey, he could feel that the morale of his soldiers was plummeting. Some of them had even started to cower before joining the siege. This wasn't a good sign, even without using those indestructible steel puppets, as well as the monsters that emitted a bloodthirsty aura from head to toe. Are you sure you want to stop attacking now? Perhaps in another 10 minutes, our soldiers will occupy the city walls? Kerwin's tone was filled with strong uncertainty. Impossible. Please take a good look at the determined expression on the enemy's face. Were they afraid? Did they fear death? No, none of them. I read only a fanaticism in their eyes, an unknown fanaticism. Under such circumstances, the more you oppress them, the more they will resist. The best way to deal with such a situation is to give them some time to consider whether such a huge sacrifice is worth it, Baron Kalin analyzed calmly. As a veteran commander and powerful warrior, he had seen many similar situations and knew that the best way to deal with it was to deal with it coldly. Otherwise, if they continued to fight recklessly, their soldiers would crumble first. And if the morale of an army crumbled, it would take a long time for them to recover before they could enter the battlefield again. Even though the soldiers were only recruited as cannon fodder to fight the enemy, the tyrant had started to treat them seriously. However, the tyrant had started to pay attention to the people he had once regarded as trash. He had even equipped them with high-quality weapons and armor, hoping to create an elite force with amazing combat power. So, no matter what angle he looked at it from, he had to ensure that they wouldn't lose faith in him and his army. Kerwin was well aware of that. After hesitating for a few minutes, he nodded in the end. All right, stop the attack. Let the soldiers rest for the night. But don't stop the catapults, ballistas, and ballistas. I want to see if they can maintain their fanaticism after being bombarded repeatedly. Understood. I will have the smiths use the oil to make sure they don't have a chance to rest. Baron Kalin bowed slightly and walked to the rear to give the order to the smiths operating the machines. When the retreat bell was rung and countless soldiers retreated like a tide, one after another, ignited pots fell in various areas within the city walls. In less than 10 minutes, the flames spread everywhere. The slums built with wood were the worst affected. The black smoke made it impossible for anyone to approach, let alone put out the fire. Helpless, the Dark Church could only organize their men to forcefully demolish a portion of the buildings and pour water into them, barely managing to establish 2 zones of separation. Naturally, that wasn't the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was that the warehouses used to store food were set ablaze. That meant that apart from the rations they carried with them, they had lost their most important food supply. They would run out of food in a week at most. Madam, the granary is finished. What do we do now? Asked one of the church's leaders with a pale face. Did your faith in the God of darkness waver just because you want to get some food? Don't forget, our ultimate goal is to awaken him through a cruel and bloody sacrifice. Open your eyes and take a good look at the blood-soaked walls. The God has gathered enough power today. Tell all his believers that the time to test their faith has come. If the enemy's numbers aren't enough, we will sacrifice ourselves. Including me, we will all sacrifice our lives for the final victory. As she said that, her eyes flashed with a crazed light. She was very clear that the tyrant wouldn't give her any chance to escape. She would either use up all the chips she had or be completely destroyed from her body to her soul. There was no third possibility. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1156. Sacrifice. Sacrifice ourselves? Have you gone mad? If we all die, the entire church will be plunged into chaos. The tyrant will not let go of such an opportunity. He will kill us all. That's right. We can't do such a crazy thing. Maybe we just need to hold on for a few more days and kill a few more enemy soldiers. For a moment, the upper echelons of the church were shocked by these shocking words. One had to know that when they first joined the church, they might have been forced to do so. But when they found out that the God they served could give them power, the ambition and desire in everyone's heart were stimulated. They were eager to take this opportunity to take a gamble and successfully change their destiny. But now, this crazy woman actually wanted them to commit suicide when they saw the hope of success. How could that be? No one would be willing to sacrifice their precious life at this time. In comparison, they were more willing to encourage their believers to fight the enemy. Just like most of the upper echelons of the organization, they would always see the lower echelons as cannon fodder and expendable goods. Why? Are you not willing to sacrifice yourselves for the great God of darkness? The woman's eyes were filled with coldness as she swept her gaze across everyone present. No, it's not that we're not willing to sacrifice ourselves for the great God of darkness. It's just that things haven't gotten that bad yet. Madam, please stay calm. We still have time. Another slightly older person stood up and tried to persuade her. But unfortunately, the woman did not intend to listen to this nonsense. Before anyone could react, she suddenly pulled out her holy sword and directly pierced through the guy closest to her. Then, she smiled sinisterly at the remaining people and said, "Coward, is this your so-called devotion to the God of darkness? Looks like I've indulged you too much. Damn it, you lunatic, look at what you've done." Accompanied by shock and roars, the pitiful victim's corpse was swallowed up by the black fog at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then a huge hand grabbed the soul tightly and dragged it into the black vortex. Because the whole process was too fast, when the black vortex disappeared, everyone finally regained their senses. They realized that this was not an ordinary death, but the complete annihilation of the body and soul. My God, you actually... The old priest who had tried to dissuade him was now trembling all over, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. However, the woman didn't seem to care at all. She gently wiped the blood stains on the holy sword and said in an emotionless tone, "No one can escape from the sacrifice, no matter if it's me or you. The God of darkness would definitely awaken. He would bring faith to this world, true faith. Those false gods and nobles will vanish before the boundless divine power." No, this was not the doctrine of the God of darkness. Absolutely not. It's you. It was you, a madman, who tried to take your evil ideas as the will of God. That's right. We don't accept it. Kill her. As long as she was dead, that holy sword will be ours. The credit for awakening the God of darkness will also fall on our heads. What are you hesitating for? She's just one person. Under the instigation of a few people, the red-eyed fellows revealed ferocious expressions. There were already some who were dissatisfied that the entire church was under the command of a woman. Now, they finally exploded. There were even some who couldn't hold back and started to use simple divine spells that they had just obtained from God, vainly trying to seize control of the church. Unfortunately, I didn't know how foolish their actions were and how powerful the enemy they were dealing with was. In the blink of an eye, the woman waved the holy sword and reaped more than a third of the lives present. No hesitation, no pity, and no sympathy. Now, she only wanted to kill. She wanted to use fresh blood, lives, and souls to make up for the lack of divinity of the God of darkness and let him obtain a complete consciousness. Under such an efficient massacre, the church's higher-ups who thought they had the advantage in numbers were all wiped out within a few minutes. However, this little sacrifice was obviously far from enough to satisfy the thirsty God of darkness. Therefore, the woman went all out and directly released all the potential of the holy sword, using a huge magic shield to envelop the entire city. Just as everyone was wondering what the use of this black smoke was, heart-wrenching screams began to reverberate in the sky above the city. Merciless slaughter, desperate deaths. These pitiful believers didn't expect that the woman who usually acted like a saint would suddenly kill them. In less than 2 or 3 hours, there was no living thing in the entire city other than her, including the rats and cockroaches in the sewers. They were all cleaned up by the Holy Swords Massacre. What on earth happened in the city? Kerwin quickly came out of the tent, staring at the city that had suddenly fallen into a dead silence. Sorry, we don't know for the time being. All the spies were grabbed by black hands before they could get close to the city walls, and then disappeared without a trace. If nothing unexpected happened, they were most likely killed by some kind of evil magic. An officer hurriedly stood up and explained. It wasn't hard to see from the panicked expression on his face that the woman's crazy actions had not only frightened her own people, but also fiercely intimidated her opponents. At least, Kerwin didn't intend to use this opportunity to launch an all-out attack. Just as there was a slight commotion in the city's camp, the dense dark clouds in the sky suddenly rumbled. The next second, a huge figure tore through the dark clouds, walking out a vortex-like black hole. He was so huge, wearing a black velvet-like robe and holding a scepter-like weapon in his hand. His 2 eyes revealed the purest darkness that originated from the birth of the world. The giant first glanced at the scattered corpses in the city, and a sorrowful expression appeared on his face. He took the initiative to speak, sacrifice, a great sacrifice. I will remember you, my devout people. Now come, gather by my side. I promised that I would create a perfect world after you die, a kingdom that belongs to God alone. Accompanied by an aria-like voice, many of the corpses on the ground began to float with pale, transparent souls. It was as if they had found their way home, and they all gathered by the giant's side, their faces full of excitement and joy. It was the excitement and joy that believers had when they saw their God. Chapter 11:57. This is the materialization of the power of darkness, the god of darkness born from the bell of chaos. The woman raised her head and stared blankly at the huge figure in the sky. She was not like the souls of the dead believers who gathered around the god they served. She was also not like the army that belonged to the tyrant outside the city. They were almost scared out of their wits and could not help but retreat frantically before the order was given. After all, to mortals, the level of creatures like gods was too high. Just one look would produce an indescribable sense of intense reverence and fear. But for some reason, she did not feel any joy or excitement in her heart. Instead, she felt a strong sense of loss, as if she had just lost something very important. The god of darkness, Loa, had obviously noticed the woman standing alone in the middle of the sea of fire. He bent down and asked in a very friendly tone, "What's wrong, my chosen one? Are you excited and unhappy to see me?" "No, I'm very happy. But for some reason, I keep feeling that something is missing. It's like..." The woman suddenly paused, and a terrifying light suddenly shot out from her eyes. The god of darkness was undoubtedly aware of this, and immediately began to retreat vigilantly. But before he could retreat far, the woman leaped high into the air at an extremely fast speed. The holy sword in her hand immediately exploded with incomparably holy and resplendent energy waves. The next second, boom, a light that was countless times brighter than the sun was released, causing unimaginable damage to the huge body. How dare you?" The god of darkness roared and raised his scepter in an attempt to kill this foolish mortal who had offended him. But unfortunately, no matter how powerful he looked, he was only a new god who had just awakened from the chaos. His power was still very limited and could not resist the power of a divine artifact. In just a short second, half of his face was destroyed by the positive energy that was completely opposite to the power of darkness. A large patch of bloody burn marks appeared. That's right. I finally understand why I'm so disappointed. Why one is not a god at all, but the darkness itself. You're too shallow and too weak. You can't represent and bear the darkness itself. The woman opened her mouth and laughed hysterically. "What? You're saying that I'm too shallow and weak? Lua roared angrily. Isn't that so? Look at your consciousness and body that are mixed with the beliefs of countless mortals. You're not worthy of the depth and purity of the darkness. No, you're not what I've always longed for in my heart. So I will destroy you and take your place. Only I, a child blessed by darkness since I was young, have the right to be crowned with the name of darkness. After saying that, the woman pounced on him like a mad dog, using the powerful artifact to continuously cut and seize the divinity in his body. As for those mortals who were only left with souls, they could only watch helplessly as she slowly destroyed their last hope. The battle lasted for a very short time. In less than 15 minutes, the newly born god of darkness, Lua, fell to the ground on his last breath. He didn't even have the time to gather the souls of his believers and build a kingdom of his own. I'm sorry, you've disappointed me. After saying this, the woman completely ignored the injuries on her body and pierced the chest of the god of darkness with her sacred sword. She killed the first true god in this world, and also the last one. After doing all this, she carefully dug out the beating black heart in her chest. She pursed her lips and muttered to herself, "Since even God can't satisfy me, I can only satisfy myself. Come, great darkness, listen my request and become one with me. From today onwards, my name is Darkness. I represent all sin and evil in this world." As soon as she finished speaking, the black heart burst open at once, releasing a black fog that filled the sky and completely engulfed the area within a kilometer of warlocks. The soldiers who were retreating outside the city were all enveloped in the fog. Only Kerwin and a few other high-ranking officials managed to escape with the protection of magic. Calvin could not help but shudder as he looked at the unlucky bastards struggling at the edge, only to be swallowed by the black fog in the end. Damn it, who the hell can tell me what's going on? It seems like those fellows have awakened their god, one of his followers replied. God? Kerwin was stunned. Do gods really exist in this world? Don't ask me. I don't know. Maybe not. But I can't deny that the huge figure that suddenly appeared in the city is not something we can fight against, whether it's a god or not, Callens concluded. As a warrior who loved destruction and slaughter, this was the first time he felt such a strong sense of fear towards something. It was as if every cell in his body was warning him to escape as quickly as possible. But what about my army? Calvin glanced at the pitch-black darkness in front of him. Naturally, the army he was referring to wasn't the human soldiers, but the steel golems he hadn't mobilized in time. Give up. I don't have the confidence to walk out alive after entering the black fog. Also, I suggest you retreat as soon as possible. Who knows if it will continue to spread in all directions? Callan said as he picked up a rock and threw it into the distance. The moment the rock came into contact with the black fog, it seemed to have been transformed by some magical force. It seemed to have been affected by some kind of mysterious power, and it directly dissolved into powder. Faced with such a dangerous situation, even Kerwin hurriedly retreated tens of meters away. In the end, he suppressed his reluctance and nodded. You're right. Looks like I've underestimated the enemy. Regardless of whether that thing is a god or not, it's not something we can deal with. We need allies. Many of them. I believe the neighboring nations will stand with us when they hear about this. After all, something of unknown origin that possessed incredible power was filled with uncertainty and danger no matter how one looked at it. As long as it exists, the threat will never disappear, Baron Kellenst agreed. All right, let's go. With the information we have, we should be able to take a leading position in this alliance. Perhaps this loss isn't a bad thing. At least we'll be the first to know what kind of threat we're facing. Kerwin said as he mounted his horse and galloped in the opposite direction without looking back. He had a premonition, an ominous premonition. Something terrible was about to happen, and it was very likely that the mysterious master was behind it. Chapter 1158. Ha, do you feel it? The darkness that has been nurtured in this land. Although I knew that woman would do something unexpected, I didn't expect her to be so crazy as to kill her own religion and replace it. Not long after Kerwin and the others left, Zhang Cheng appeared with Isolt. His eyes were full of admiration as he admired the huge area covered by the black fog. He couldn't help but admire it. Mortals were always subconsciously bound by the concept of community, firmly tying themselves to the entire society. Very few could jump out of this circle and observe and think from a higher perspective. Because of the need for the survival and development of civilization, when intelligent beings were not individually strong enough to deal with all kinds of dangerous situations, they would naturally gather together, relying on the advantage of numbers to better survive and reproduce. And this gathering was the germination of the birth of society. Although sociality could bring about better team coordination, it would also greatly weaken individual awareness, especially when certain actions or powers were far beyond the comprehension of their own kind. All kinds of slander, jealousy, and curses would follow. They would either give up their original plans to integrate with the majority of people or completely cut off from society. In the end, they would be regarded as an outcast or a black sheep and be mercilessly mocked and ridiculed. In such an environment, if one's will was strong and could clearly understand what they were doing, there might be a glimmer of hope to surpass oneself. But if there was even the slightest hesitation, everything would be lost in the end. Without a doubt, this crazy woman was the kind of person who refused to bow down to society, drifting on the edge of the so-called civilized world from the beginning to the end. Blessed by the power of darkness, she always knew that she was different from ordinary people. So even when facing a true god, she still chose to resolutely kill him and replace him. Her perseverance, bravery, madness, as well as her incomparably clear understanding of herself, made her seem so special and different from the rest. Isolt carefully grabbed a mysterious substance floating in the black fog with his hand wrapped in magic energy and immediately exclaimed in surprise, "Unbelievable! Is this the energy produced by the manifestation of darkness? I don't even know what words to use to describe it. It's very pure, isn't it?" Zhang Cheng turned around and asked with a smile. "It's more than pure. It's more amazing than any magical energy I've ever come into contact with. Can you tell me what that woman is doing in there right now?" Isolt's old face was filled with excitement. Nothing was more worth cheering and jumping for joy than finding a new kind of energy. This meant a new research direction and the birth of countless new spells. He even felt that if he could control darkness like he could control other magical energies one day, he would be able to make a qualitative leap from quantity to quality. That woman, Zhang Cheng's gaze seemed to penetrate the thick fog and look directly at the broken city. It took him a full minute before he answered meaningfully. "She's completing a transformation from an ordinary person to an extraordinary. Do you know what a god?" "I don't." Isolt shook his head. "A god is a collection of strong will and will. It could be born from the intense desires of countless mortals, or it could also be an individual's self-transcendence. But in the end, to say it's a human's, from the perspective of life, this kind of change is far more than a mother giving birth to a baby from nothing. This also means that when a mortal becomes a god, their personality, thoughts, and ideals will change drastically, and they will be completely different from when they were a mortal. How about it? Are you interested in witnessing the transformation of a goddess of darkness from a distance?" Zhang Cheng's face was filled with an evil smile as he took the initiative to invite them. It could be seen that he was in a rather good mood, and even a little bit excited. After all, in the original plan, he didn't expect this woman to kill the god of darkness and replace him. What was more interesting was that this small accident would lead to uncertainty in the future, just like the butterfly effect. Although the possibility was small, it could still change the final result. "It will be my pleasure." Isolt bowed deeply without hesitation. This kind of opportunity was simply a dream for him. If he could pry into the mysteries of immortality, it would be worth it even if he had to pay a hefty price. Without tasting the feeling of aging, one would never be able to understand why so many powerful old people, without exception, yearn for longevity, yearn to be young, and yearned for death to never come. Then what are you waiting for? Come with me. Zhang Cheng didn't say anything else, and directly led the way into the thick black fog. Wherever he passed, all the fog seemed to have met its natural enemy, and quickly retreated, leaving an incomparably narrow passage. Isolt, who was following behind, trembled in fear of touching the boiling energy. Just like that, the two of them walked through the darkness for about 40 minutes. Finally, they saw a naked woman soaked in a purplish-red liquid, which was constantly releasing violent energy. The fog was the result of this energy splattering in all directions. Before seeing it with his own eyes, Isolt would never have dared to believe that a mere woman could be favored by so much energy. It was as if she was born the child of darkness, and every move of hers could cause fluctuations in the surrounding dark energy. Standing outside this barrier formed by the divinity of darkness, Zhang Cheng stroked his chin and admired the woman's rapidly changing body and soul with great interest. After about 2 or 3 minutes, he commented, "Pure, persistent, crazy. You have almost all the qualities of a successful person. Perhaps I should give you a chance, shouldn't I?" Opportunity? A glint flashed across Isolde's eyes. Yes, chance. Do you know? Many people like to talk about fate. Some people accept fate, thinking that it is something that can't be escaped no matter what, and very few people believe that fate can be changed and controlled. The result is that the former are mediocre, struggling to survive their whole lives, while the latter constantly try all kinds of possibilities until they are disheartened and accept the so-called fate's arrangement. These people don't understand the true meaning of fate, but this woman not only understands it, but also sees it as closely connected with a sense of responsibility and mission. Finally, with a trace of luck, she became what she is now, a goddess in the midst of transformation. As he said this, Zhang Cheng gently pushed aside the barrier of divinity with his hand and stroked the woman's smooth and tender skin like silk. Chapter 1159. Then, what do you plan to do with her? Isolt's eyes were filled with undisguised greed and desire. Of course, this did not mean that he was interested in the beauty and body of the goddess, but that he was extremely eager to know the secrets contained in this body. As an old man, he had long passed the age where he was easily affected by physiological urges. Instead, he was full of desire for knowledge and power, especially those that could prolong one's life and pry into the secrets of immortality. He would not hesitate to explore them. "Oh, what do you think I should do with her?" Zhang Cheng turned his head and asked with a faint smile. Isolt hesitated for a moment, but soon he could not suppress the restlessness in his heart and carefully replied, "I think she will be an extremely rare experimental subject. Perhaps she can be used for a series of complicated experiments." "Ha! You want me to put her on the experiment table and cut her into pieces, don't you?" Zhang Cheng directly exposed his subordinate's little trick. This old man in front of him had never concealed his ambition, and had even proposed to obtain some methods to prolong his life many times. But out of an evil interest, he had never agreed, and had only given him a small amount of potions and magic items to increase his life potential. It should be known that if these things were used on a young person, they would naturally greatly increase their lifespan. But if they were used on an old man who was nearing the end of his life, it could only be said that it was better than nothing. But the more it was like this, the more the strong desire did not disappear, but instead became even more intense. Feeling the violent beating of his heart in his chest, Isolt took a deep breath and bowed deeply with a bitter smile. "Master, please don't play with my nerves. They're too fragile, so fragile that they could collapse at any time. I'm afraid you don't know this, but right now, I have the urge to snatch her away. Then, I'll hide and research day and night until I find a way to become a god or obtain eternal life. You are honest, and I like your honesty. And you are not stupid enough to put this idea into action. As a mortal, the most important thing is to have self-awareness and understand that there's a line that cannot be crossed. But unfortunately, I can't fulfill your request. This woman is a crucial part of the plan. She will decide the future of the entire world." As he spoke, Zhang Cheng raised his head and looked into the distance. His pair of dominating eyes could see through time and space, as if seeing the countless possibilities of the future. But unfortunately, time was ultimately an illusory thing. The real determinants were still space, matter, and energy. Well, it seems that I have missed this opportunity. Isolde regretfully sighed, a trace of reluctance in his eyes. How could he be satisfied, seeing that the secrets of immortality and becoming a god were so close at hand, but they couldn't even touch it? Anyone would feel an indescribable difference in their mentality. Unfortunately, in the face of absolute power, any rash actions, it was no different from suicide. Therefore, he decisively chose to endure instead of playing with his life. However, Zhangqing obviously did not want to disappoint this useful chess piece. He gently cut open the skin of the woman's arm with his fingernail and squeezed out a few drops of dark purple blood mixed with mortal and divine nature. He put it into a transparent crystal bottle and threw it over. "Here you go. This is..." Isolde's eyes widened, a look of shock on his face. "A bottle of blood that is between a god and a mortal. You can take it back and study it. You can even use it to create a magical potion. Remember, be careful of the erosion of divinity. Although this thing can give you great strength, abilities, and a long lifespan, it will also have incalculable side effects in the future." Zhang Cheng explained casually. "Understood. Thank you for your kindness and generosity. I will keep it in mind." Isolde hurriedly put away the precious blood of divinity. If one looked closely, they would see that his hands, which were hidden under his loose robe, were clenched into fists in excitement. They were also trembling slightly. Excitement, ecstasy. Even he did not know how to describe the impact of the blood flowing through his veins at high speed. Zhang Cheng ignored the old man's loss of composure. He directly picked up the naked goddess, who was in the midst of her transformation, and tore open a spatial passage on the spot. Isolde saw this and followed suit. In the blink of an eye, the two appeared under the gigantic tree of chaos. As it had already begun to bear fruit, this gigantic tree did not grow significantly these days. Only the roots were becoming more and more developed, becoming more and more exaggerated. The thick roots covered an area of hundreds of kilometers. Some of the animals that had mutated under the influence of the Tree of Chaos even began to have preliminary intelligence and the ability to think. They gathered on the roots and treetops, building their own homes. Although they were still very primitive and low-level, they were barely qualified to be called intelligent life. It was estimated that after a long period of development, they had not yet replaced the natives living on this planet. Isolde raised his head. He was so shocked that he could not speak. After all, he more or less knew a little about this gigantic tree. However, hearing about it was one thing, and seeing it with his own eyes was another. The feeling of covering the sky and not being able to see the top was not something a puny mortal could bear. This is the Tree of Chaos that I planted. How is it? Isn't it majestic and spectacular? It won't be long before it replaces this planet and becomes the habitat of countless creatures. Come, I'll take you to see the fruit that the Tree of Chaos has produced. I'll also tell you why this woman is so important." As the last word left his mouth, Zhang Cheng began to climb up along the vines that surrounded the tree trunk. As the woman was emitting a shocking amount of dark energy, she attracted many powerful monsters along the way. However, none of them dared to approach Zhang Cheng, who was also emitting an even more terrifying aura. He did not know how long had passed. Perhaps it was a few hours, perhaps it was a day or two. The moment Isolde, who felt like he was about to collapse, stepped onto the top of the tree trunk, he suddenly realized that there was a strange-looking fruit in front of him. It was constantly trying to invade his brain and pry into the most private parts of his memories. Damn it, what the hell is this? He could not help but take a few steps back vigilantly. Relax, this is the fruit that I mentioned to you. Not only does it have independent thoughts and consciousness, but it also has terrifying spiritual power. Zhang Cheng comforted him as he placed the naked woman below the fruit.